The carbon monoxide detector screamed at 2 a.m., but Ethan Cole was already choking. He stumbled through the smoke-filled cabin, his lungs burning, searching for the woman he'd met just 3 days ago. The billionaire in designer boots who couldn't hammer a nail straight but refused to quit. Victoria Ashford lay unconscious near the broken stove, her billion-dollar empire meaning nothing in a room filling with poison. Ethan had seconds to decide. Save her and risk everything, or let the mountain claim another victim. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a single dad and a runaway heiress ended up fighting for their lives in the Montana wilderness. If you want to see how this impossible partnership survives, stick with me until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The nail gun jammed again. Ethan Cole swore under his breath, setting the tool down on the sagging porch of the Henderson cabin. March in Montana meant the morning air still had teeth, and his fingers were stiff inside his work gloves. He'd been at it since sunrise. Just him, a thermos of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and about 15 years' worth of dry rot that needed addressing before the whole structure gave up and slid down the mountain. "Dad?" He turned. His daughter Lily stood in the doorway of his truck, still in her pajamas under her puffy coat, her dark hair sticking up in about 7 different directions. She was supposed to be sleeping in the extended cab while he got a few hours of work done before school. "Yeah, Peanut?" "I'm hungry." Ethan checked his watch. 7:15. The bus wouldn't come for another hour and 15 minutes, and he'd promised her pancakes. "Give me 10 minutes to pack up," he said. "We'll hit the diner in town." Lily's face brightened. She was 7, almost 8 she'd correct him, and still young enough that the promise of blueberry pancakes could fix most problems. Ethan wished his own troubles dissolved that easily. He was gathering his tools when he heard the engine, not the rumble of a pickup or the rattle of the logging trucks that sometimes took the mountain roads. This was something else. Smooth, expensive, completely wrong for this terrain. Ethan straightened up, shading his eyes against the morning sun breaking through the pines. A black Mercedes SUV came around the bend, moving too fast for the gravel road. It fishtailed slightly before the driver overcorrected, then slowed to a crawl. Ethan watched it approach with the mixture of curiosity and suspicion that came natural to people who lived this far from town. Nobody came up here unless they were lost or looking for trouble. The SUV stopped about 20 feet from his truck. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened, and out stepped someone who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn out of a magazine spread. She was tall, maybe 5'9", wearing dark jeans that probably cost more than Ethan's truck payment and a cream-colored sweater that had never seen a day of actual work. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and even from this distance, Ethan could see the kind of polish that came from having people whose job it was to make you look good. But it was the shoes that really got him. Leather boots with a heel, designer label probably, completely impractical for mountain terrain. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a duffel bag, also expensive looking, and slung it over her shoulder. Then she stood there for a moment, staring at the cabin like it had personally offended her. Ethan set down his tool bag and walked over. Lily had climbed out of the truck and was watching with the unfiltered interest of a 7-year-old. "You lost?" he called out. The woman turned. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30, 31. Pretty, in that carefully maintained way that wealthy people achieved. But there was something in her eyes, something tight around her mouth, that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer will. "No," she said. Her voice was cool, controlled. "This is the Ashford cabin, isn't it?" Ethan blinked. "The what?" "The Ashford family cabin." She gestured toward the Henderson place. "This property. It belongs to my family." "This is the Henderson cabin," Ethan said slowly. "Has been for 40 years. I'm doing restoration work for—" "The Hendersons sold it 6 months ago," the woman interrupted. "To Ashford Properties, my father's company." She paused. "I'm Victoria Ashford." The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the tone said it was supposed to. He crossed his arms. "Okay, and you're here because—" Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because I'm going to be living here." There was a beat of silence. Then Ethan laughed. He couldn't help it. "Living here? Lady, there's no electricity. The well's questionable. The roof leaks in 3 places, and I'm pretty sure there's a family of raccoons in the attic. You can't live here." Nevertheless, Victoria shifted the duffel bag on her shoulder. "That's what I'm doing." "Who's she?" Lily piped up from behind Ethan. Victoria's gaze shifted to his daughter, and something in her expression softened fractionally. "I'm Victoria. Who are you?" "Lily, that's my dad." She pointed at Ethan. "Are you really going to live in that old place? It smells funny." "Lily," Ethan said, but Victoria's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I'm sure it does," she said. "I'm hoping your father can help fix that." Ethan shook his head. "Look, Ms. Ashford, Victoria." "Victoria, I'm contracted through Henderson Properties to do structural work. I don't know anything about your family buying the place, and I've got about 3 weeks of work ahead of me before this cabin's even safe to occupy. You can't just move in." "The contract transferred with the sale," Victoria said. Her voice had gone businesslike, like she was in a boardroom instead of standing in ankle-deep pine needles. "I have the paperwork in the car. You'll be paid exactly what was agreed upon, plus a bonus if you can make the cabin livable within the next week." "A week?" Ethan stared at her. "I just told you. I heard what you told me." Victoria met his eyes. "But I need to stay here, and I need it to be habitable. Name your price." There was something in the way she said it, not demanding exactly, but desperate in a way she was trying very hard to hide. Ethan had seen that look before, in his own mirror during the bad years after Lily's mother left. The look of someone who'd run out of options and was trying to pretend they were still in control. He should have said no. Should have told her to find a hotel in town, come back when the cabin was ready. But Lily's school fees were due next month, and his truck needed new brakes, and the bonus she was talking about could mean the difference between scraping by and actually building something. "Double," he said. "Double the original contract, half up front." He expected her to negotiate. Rich people always negotiated, but Victoria just nodded. "Fine. I'll have my attorney wire the funds today." She glanced at the cabin. "When can you start?" "I already started, but if you're serious about staying here..." Ethan shook his head. "There's a motel in town, the Pine Lodge. It's not fancy, but it's clean and they have heat." "I'm staying here," Victoria said firmly. "There's no heat here." "Then I'll manage." She turned toward the cabin, then paused. "I assume you have basic tools? Hammer, nails, that sort of thing?" Ethan couldn't help the laugh that escaped. "Yeah, I've got basic tools." "Good." Victoria started walking toward the cabin, her expensive boots crunching on the gravel. "I'll help." "You'll wait." Ethan jogged to catch up. "You don't know the first thing about construction." Victoria stopped at the porch steps, one hand on the railing that Ethan knew for a fact was barely holding on. "Then I'll learn. You're charging me double. Consider it part of the service." She climbed the steps before he could argue, the railing swaying under her weight. Ethan watched her disappear into the cabin, then looked down at Lily. His daughter grinned up at him. "She's weird." "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "She really is." They went to the diner after all, Ethan, Lily, and surprisingly, Victoria. It had been Lily's idea. She'd informed Victoria, with the blunt honesty of childhood, that she looked hungry and probably should eat something before trying to live in a broken house. Victoria had hesitated, then admitted she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. So now they sat in a booth at Maggie's Mountain Diner, Lily working her way through a stack of blueberry pancakes while Victoria picked at a vegetable omelet, and Ethan nursed his third coffee of the morning. "So," Maggie herself said, refilling Ethan's cup with the familiarity of someone who'd known him for years. "Who's your friend?" "Victoria," Lily announced through a mouthful of pancake. "She's going to live in the Henderson cabin, even though it's broken." Maggie's eyebrows rose. She was 60-something, with gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that saw through most people's nonsense. "That right?" "Temporarily," Victoria said. Her posture was perfect, Ethan noticed, back straight, shoulders squared, like she was having lunch with a board of directors instead of sitting in a small-town diner with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that only played country songs from the 90s. "Uh-huh." Maggie looked at Ethan. "This a good idea?" "Not my call," Ethan said. "She's paying me to make it work." "Paying you double," Victoria corrected. She took a small bite of her omelet, then another. Ethan suspected she was hungrier than she wanted to let on. Lily swung her legs under the table. Do you have kids? Lily, Ethan warned, but Victoria shook her head. It's fine. No, I don't have children. Are you married? No. How come? That's enough, Ethan said. Eat your breakfast. Lily subsided, but she kept watching Victoria with open curiosity. Victoria, for her part, seemed more amused than annoyed. After Maggie left, Victoria set down her fork. How old is she? She asked Ethan. 7. Almost 8. Her mother? Not in the picture. Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended. Hasn't been for 5 years. Victoria nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're fine. He was surprised to realize he meant it. The early years had been brutal, trying to learn how to be a single dad while keeping his contracting business afloat, dealing with Lily's questions about why Mommy left, the constant fear that he was screwing everything up. But they'd found their rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. What about you? He asked. What brings a... He gestured vaguely at her expensive watch, her manicured nails. What brings someone like you to a half-collapsed cabin in the middle of nowhere? Victoria's expression shuddered. Family business? Right. Ethan could tell a conversation ender when he heard one. Well, after I drop Lily at school, I'll head back up and get started on making the place safe. You'll need a working stove at minimum, and I'll have to do something about the roof before the next rain. What can I do? Victoria asked. Ethan almost laughed again. You serious about wanting to help? I don't say things I don't mean. He studied her. This woman in her designer jeans and impractical boots who held her coffee cup like it was fine china and sat like she'd never relaxed a day in her life. She had no business on a construction site. She'd probably last an hour before giving up and retreating to that Mercedes. But something in her eyes stopped him from saying so. That same desperate determination he'd seen earlier. Fine, he said. You can help clear out the main room. There's years of junk in there. Old furniture, boxes, dead leaves. It all needs to go before I can assess the real damage. You'll need different shoes, though. Those won't cut it. Victoria looked down at her boots. These are Louboutin. I don't care if they're made of gold. You'll break an ankle in 5 minutes. Ethan drained his coffee. There's a general store in town. They sell work boots. Get some before you come back up. Fine. And gloves, and about 3 changes of clothes you don't mind ruining. Victoria's mouth thinned, but she nodded. Anything else? Yeah. Ethan leaned back in the booth. Whatever you're running from, it might be worth dealing with directly instead of hiding in a broken cabin in the woods. For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped. Ethan saw something raw flash across her face. Anger, maybe, or fear, or both mixed together. Then it was gone, replaced by that cool composure. I'm not running, she said quietly. I'm standing my ground. There's a difference. Before Ethan could respond, Lily tugged on his sleeve. Dad, we're going to be late. She was right. The bus would be at the stop in 20 minutes. Ethan signaled for the check, but Victoria was already pulling out a credit card. I've got it, she said. You don't have to. Consider it a thank you for the advice about the boots. She handed the card to Maggie, who'd reappeared with the check. Though I'm ignoring the part about dealing with my problems directly. Ethan found himself almost smiling. Yeah, I figured you would. Back. By the time Ethan got it back to the cabin that afternoon, Victoria had already been working for 2 hours. He knew because the pile of junk outside had grown considerably, and when he walked inside, he found her in the main room, covered in dust, wrestling with an old rocking chair that had seen better days about 40 years ago. She'd taken his advice about the clothes, at least. Gone were the designer jeans and expensive sweater. Instead, she wore worn denim, a flannel shirt that had probably come from the general store's clearance rack, and actual work boots. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and there was a smudge of dirt across her cheek. She looked, Ethan thought, almost human. That chair's infested, he said by way of greeting. Termites, probably. It needs to go on the burn pile, not the keep pile. Victoria looked up. I thought it could be saved. Why? It's falling apart. It's the only piece of furniture in here that looks like it actually belonged to a family. She ran her hand over the worn armrest. Someone sat in this chair, rocked their baby to sleep maybe, or read the paper in the morning. It has history. Ethan felt something shift in his estimation of her. History full of termites, he said, but his tone was gentler. I can't save it. But if you want, I can build you a new one, same style. Victoria looked surprised. You build furniture? Sometimes, when people pay me to. He set down his toolbox. But right now we need to focus on making this place livable. The stove's completely shot. I'll need to replace it. And the chimney's blocked. I can probably clear it, but it's going to take time. How much time? More than a week. Ethan pulled out his measuring tape. Look, I'll do my best, but you need to be realistic. This cabin's been abandoned for years. There's work that can't be rushed. Victoria set down the rocking chair. My father thinks I'll give up, she said abruptly. That's why he sent me here. He thinks I'll last maybe 3 days before I come crawling back, ready to do whatever he wants. Ethan paused. What does he want? For me to marry someone I don't love. To give up my position in the company. To be what he thinks a daughter should be instead of who I actually am. Her voice was steady, but Ethan heard the anger underneath. This cabin, it's the only property I have any legal claim to. A trust from my grandfather that my father can't touch. So I'm staying here until I can figure out how to break free completely. That's... Ethan searched for the right word. That's a lot. Yes. Victoria met his eyes. So you see why I can't go to a motel. Why I need to make this work. Ethan did see. More than she probably realized. He'd had his own version of this fight. Different circumstances, but the same core truth. Sometimes you had to plant your feet and refuse to move, even when the ground under you was shaky. Okay, he said. Then let's make it work. Good. The next 3 days established a rhythm. Ethan would arrive at sunrise, Lily still asleep in the truck, and find Victoria already up, usually attempting some task she didn't quite know how to do. He'd correct her technique, show her the right way to hold a hammer or measure a board, and she'd absorb it all with the same focus she probably applied to whatever it was billionaires did in their regular lives. She was a terrible carpenter. Her measurements were always slightly off, and the first time she tried to drive a nail, she nearly took off her thumb. But she kept at it with a stubborn persistence that Ethan reluctantly respected. By the 3rd day, they'd cleared out the main room and half of the smaller bedroom. The new stove was on order, expensive, but Victoria hadn't blinked at the cost. Ethan had patched the worst of the roof leaks and was working on clearing the chimney. It was late afternoon when things went sideways. Ethan was on the roof, examining a section of damaged shingles when he heard Victoria call up to him. Someone's coming. He looked down. Victoria stood in the clearing, shading her eyes as she watched a car navigate the mountain road. Not a truck this time, a sleek sedan, black, with tinted windows. Ethan climbed down the ladder. Friend of yours? No? Victoria's voice had gone tight. That's my father's car. The sedan pulled up and stopped. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his 60s, tall, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses and Mediterranean vacations. He wore a suit, an actual suit in the mountains, and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Victoria, he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and completely cold. This is enough. Get in the car. Victoria crossed her arms. No, don't be childish. The man, her father, Ethan realized, glanced at the cabin with barely concealed disgust. You've made your point. You can be stubborn and dramatic. Congratulations. Now it's time to come home and discuss this like an adult. I am an adult, Victoria said, and I'm not going anywhere. Her father's expression hardened. You're living in squalor to spite me. Do you think that makes you strong? It makes you foolish. I think it makes me free. You're not free. You're broke. He smiled, thin, sharp. Oh, you have this cabin, this worthless piece of land in the middle of nowhere. But your accounts, your trust fund, your position in the company, all of it requires my approval until you're 35. You know this, so unless you plan to live like a pauper for the next 5 years, then I'll live like a pauper. Victoria's voice didn't waver. I'd rather have nothing than let you control me anymore. Ethan had been standing off to the side, trying to stay out of what was clearly a family matter. But something about the way Victoria's father looked at her, like she was a problem to be managed, not a person, made him step forward. She said she's not going, he said. Victoria's father turned, seeming to notice Ethan for the first time. His gaze swept over the work clothes, the tool belt, the dirt under Ethan's fingernails. And you are? The contractor, Ethan Cole. I see. The man's tone made it clear exactly how little he thought of contractors. This doesn't concern you, Mr. Cole. It does if you're harassing someone on a property where I'm working. Victoria's father laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Harassing? I'm attempting to rescue my daughter from her own stubbornness. If she wants to throw away her future over a tantrum, that's her choice. But she'll do it without my financial support. I don't want your money, Victoria said.
Really? Then how will you pay him? Her father gestured at Ethan. How will you buy food? Heat this hovel? You've never worked a day in your life, Victoria. You have no idea what you're walking into. Then I'll learn. You'll fail. Maybe. Victoria lifted her chin. But it'll be my failure, not yours. Not another thing you get to control. For a moment, her father just stared at her. Then he shook his head.
When you're ready to be reasonable, he said, call me. Until then, you're on your own. He got back in the car without another word. The sedan turned around and drove away, leaving silence in its wake. Victoria stood very still, watching until the car disappeared around the bend. Then she let out a breath that might have been a sob or a laugh. Ethan couldn't tell which. Victoria, he started. I need to work, she said abruptly. What else needs to be done? Maybe you should take a break. I don't want a break. I want to work. She turned to face him, and Ethan saw tears in her eyes that she was refusing to let fall. Please. Ethan recognized the feeling, the need to do something, anything, to keep from falling apart. He'd felt it after Lily's mother left, when the only thing that kept him sane was focusing on the next task, then the next, then the next. Okay, he said quietly. The bedroom window frame is rotted out. I'll show you how to remove it. Victoria nodded. She followed him into the cabin, and for the rest of the afternoon they worked in silence. Gachkit. That evening, after Ethan picked up Lily from school and drove her home to their small house on the edge of town, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. Victoria's father had been wrong about one thing. She did know what she was walking into. Maybe not the specifics of construction work or living without electricity, but the broader truth. She knew what it cost to choose freedom over comfort, and she was paying it anyway. Lily chattered through dinner about her day, about the art project she was working on, and how her friend Emma had lost a tooth. Ethan listened and responded, but part of his mind was still on the mountain, on a woman taking apart a window frame with shaking hands and perfect determination. After Lily went to bed, he sat on the porch with a beer and his phone, looking up Ashford Properties. The search results told him everything he needed to know. Ashford Properties was huge, commercial real estate, luxury developments, international holdings, worth billions. And there was Victoria's father, Robert Ashford, in photo after photo at charity galas and business conferences, always with that same cold smile. There were pictures of Victoria too. Younger, smiling, standing next to her father at ribbon cuttings and corporate events. The smile looked real in some of the earlier photos, but in the more recent ones, it was just a mask. Ethan closed the browser. Whatever was happening up on that mountain, it wasn't just about a cabin renovation anymore. Victoria was fighting a war, and she'd chosen his job site as her battlefield. He should have walked away. Should have told her to find another contractor, someone who wouldn't get pulled into family drama and billionaire problems. But when he thought about the way she'd refused to cry in front of her father, the way she'd asked to keep working instead of breaking down, he took a long drink of his beer and stared out at the dark Montana sky. "You're an idiot, Cole," he muttered to himself. But he was already planning what supplies he'd need to pick up in the morning. If Victoria was going to make this stand, he'd make damn sure the ground under her feet was solid. But the next morning started with rain. Not the gentle mountain drizzle that Montana was known for, but a proper downpour that turned the road to the cabin into a slick mud track. Ethan's truck fishtailed twice before he made it to the clearing. Victoria's Mercedes was already there, and lights were on inside the cabin. Ethan had run a temporary power line 2 days ago, just enough for some work lights and to test the electrical system. It wasn't much, but it was something. He found Victoria in the main room, measuring the space where the new stove would go. She looked up when he came in, rain dripping off his jacket. "The road's getting bad," he said. "You might want to head down before it gets worse." "I'll stay." "Victoria," I said, "I'll stay." She set down the measuring tape. I've been thinking about what my father said, about me never having worked a day in my life. He's right, you know. Ethan shrugged off his wet jacket.
I doubt he's ever worked a day in his life either. Not real work. No, but he built an empire. He started with one building and turned it into billions. I've only ever managed what he gave me. Victoria sat on the floor. She'd given up on caring about her clothes staying clean and leaned against the wall. I ran a division of the company. Real estate acquisition. I was good at it, but I didn't build it. He did, and he never let me forget it. Ethan grabbed a water bottle from his cooler and tossed her one. So build something now. Out of what? I have this cabin and maybe $3,000 in a checking account he doesn't control. Everything else is frozen until I comply with his demands. $3,000 is more than I had when I started my business. Ethan sat across from her. I had a broken-down truck, some tools I'd inherited from my grandfather, and Lily. That was it. How did you make it work? I didn't at first. I failed a lot. Took jobs that didn't pay enough, made mistakes that cost me, nearly went under about 6 times in the first year. He took a drink of water. But I kept showing up. That's the secret nobody tells you. Success isn't about being smart or talented or having the right connections. It's about being too stubborn to quit. Victoria was quiet for a moment. My father thinks stubbornness is a character flaw. Your father's wrong about a lot of things. She almost smiled. You don't even know him. I know he showed up here in a suit to tell his daughter she's worthless without his money. That tells me enough. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof. Ethan listened carefully, tracking the sound, waiting for the telltale drip of a leak, but the patches he'd done held. Small victory. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Sure. Why are you helping me? And don't say it's just the money. You could have walked away a dozen times already. Ethan considered the question. My ex-wife left because I wouldn't give up on this business. She wanted me to get a safe job, something steady. And she wasn't wrong. It would have been smarter. But I needed to build something that was mine, something I could pass on to Lily, even if it was just the knowledge that her dad didn't quit when things got hard. He met Victoria's eyes. I see that same thing in you, the need to prove you're more than what someone else says you are. So yeah, it's partly the money, but it's also because I respect what you're trying to do. Victoria looked away, blinking quickly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go before this place is livable. Speaking of which, Victoria stood, brushing dust off her jeans. The supply truck should be here soon with the new stove. Want to show me how to install it? You're not installing it. That's a 2-person job minimum, and you don't have the experience. Then I'll help and learn. Ethan shook his head, but he was smiling. You're relentless. I had a good teacher. Victoria pulled her work gloves back on. My father, ironically. He taught me that giving up is the only unforgivable sin. He just didn't expect me to apply that lesson to defying him. The supply truck arrived an hour later. The delivery driver took one look at the muddy road and the rain and informed them he wasn't driving up to the cabin. You want it? You haul it yourselves, he said, rain dripping off his baseball cap. So they did. Ethan and Victoria, pulling a dolly loaded with a cast-iron stove that weighed about 300 pounds, slowly working their way up the slick mountain road. Victoria slipped twice, catching herself before she fell, her expensive work boots covered in mud. She didn't complain once. By the time they got the stove into the cabin, they were both soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud. Victoria collapsed on the floor, breathing hard. I hate my father, she said between breaths. Yeah? He's probably sitting in his climate-controlled office right now, having his assistant bring him coffee, while I'm here looking like I fought a mud pit and lost. You kind of did fight a mud pit, Ethan pointed out. Victoria started laughing. It started as a chuckle, then built into something bigger, almost hysterical. Ethan found himself laughing too, both of them sitting in a half-destroyed cabin, filthy and tired and probably crazy. When the laughter finally died down, Victoria wiped her eyes. This is insane. Yeah. I have an MBA from Stanford. I've negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm sitting in a broken cabin in Montana, covered in mud, installing a stove with a contractor I met 4 days ago. When you put it that way, it does sound pretty insane. Victoria looked at him. I don't regret it. Even after hauling a 300-pound stove through a mud pit, especially after that. She smiled.
really smiled, not the careful mask she usually wore. My father thinks I can't handle real work, but I just did something he could never do, and that feels good? Really good. Ethan stood, offering her a hand up. Come on, let's get this thing installed before we both freeze to death in wet clothes. They worked through the afternoon, Ethan guiding Victoria through the installation process. She was a fast learner when she wanted to be, and by the time they finished, the stove was properly connected and vented. Test? Victoria asked. Ethan grabbed some kindling and newspaper. Test. He built a small fire, and they watched as the flames caught and held. Heat began to spread through the room, not much, but enough to push back the damp chill. Victoria held her hands out to the warmth, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked content. It works, she said softly. Yeah, it does. They stood there in the growing warmth, watching the fire, and Ethan realized that somewhere in the last 4 days, something had shifted. This wasn't just a job anymore. And Victoria wasn't just a client. She was someone fighting for her life, and somehow he'd become part of that fight. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the cabin, the fire burned steady and bright. The fire in the new stove had burned down to embers by the time Ethan realized he'd stayed too late. He checked his watch and swore under his breath. 6:30. Lily's after-school program ended at 6. I have to go, he said, already grabbing his jacket. My neighbor's watching Lily, but I'm pushing it. Victoria looked up from where she was sweeping sawdust into a pile. Her hair had fallen out of its ponytail, and there was a streak of soot across her forehead. Of course, thank you for today. Tomorrow we'll tackle the bedroom, Ethan said, pausing at the door. And Victoria, you did good work today. She smiled, tired but real. So did you. The drive down the mountain was treacherous in the dark, the rain still coming down in sheets. Ethan's truck slid twice, and by the time he pulled up to his house, his knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. Mrs. Chen from next door was standing on his porch, with Lily, both of them under the overhang to stay dry. Lily's backpack was at her feet, and she looked small and worried. I'm sorry, Ethan said, jogging up. The rain made everything take longer, so... It's fine, Mrs. Chen said, but her tone suggested it wasn't entirely fine. But Ethan, this is the 3rd time this week. If you need regular after-school care, I know. I'm working on it. He knelt down to Lily's level. Hey, Peanut, sorry I'm late. It's okay. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. Mrs. Chen let me help make cookies. That was nice of her. Ethan stood, lifting Lily with him. Thanks again. I promise I'll get this sorted out. Mrs. Chen nodded, but as she walked back to her house, Ethan felt the weight of it. He was stretching himself too thin. The work at the cabin was taking longer than expected. Victoria needed more help than a typical client, and Lily was getting shuffled around because of it. Inside, he made Lily mac and cheese from a box while she did homework at the kitchen table. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen barely big enough for a table. But it was theirs, paid for with money he'd scraped together doing every odd job he could find in those early years. Dad? Lily said, looking up from her math worksheet. Yeah? Is the fancy lady going to live in that cabin forever? Ethan stirred the pasta. I don't know. Why? Because you're there all the time now, more than before. Lily chewed on her pencil. Do you like her? She's a client, Lily. But do you like her? Ethan turned off the stove. She's going through a hard time. I'm helping her, that's all. Like how you helped Mr. Peterson when his wife died? You built him that ramp so he could use his wheelchair. Yeah, like that. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. But Ethan stood at the stove, thinking about Victoria sitting in that cabin alone tonight, probably cold, definitely stubborn, and wondered when exactly helping her had started to feel like more than just another job. The next morning brought sun and mud in equal measure. The storm had passed, leaving the mountain road rutted and treacherous. Ethan took it slow, and when he reached the cabin, he found Victoria outside, attempting to chop firewood. Attempting was the key word. She had the axe raised over her head at completely the wrong angle, and if she brought it down like that, she was more likely to hit her foot than the log. Stop, Ethan called out, climbing out of the truck. Before you lose a toe. Victoria lowered the axe, breathing hard. I was doing fine. You were about to send yourself to the emergency room. He walked over and took the axe from her. Here, watch. He demonstrated the proper stance, the angle of the swing, how to let the weight of the axe do most of the work. Victoria watched intently, then tried it herself under his guidance. The log split on her third try. "Better," Ethan said. "My arms are going to fall off." "Probably, but you'll have firewood." He glanced at the cabin. "How was your night?" "Cold. I went through most of the wood you left." Victoria set down the axe and pulled off her gloves. Her hands were already blistering. "But I survived." "You need to take care of those," Ethan said, nodding at her hands. "I will. After we work." "Victoria, I know my limits, Ethan. My hands hurt, but they're not bleeding. I can keep going." She met his eyes. "Stop treating me like I'm fragile. I'm not." He wanted to argue, but he recognized that stubborn set to her jaw. It was the same expression Lily got when she'd made up her mind about something. "Fine," he said, "but we're taking a break at lunch to properly bandage those hands. Non-negotiable." "Deal." They worked through the morning, clearing out the bedroom and starting on the damaged floorboards. Victoria's technique was improving. She still measured twice as slow as Ethan, and her cuts weren't always straight, but she was learning. More importantly, she wasn't complaining. Around 11, a car came up the road. Not her father's sedan this time, a smaller vehicle, a rental by the look of it. A woman got out, mid-40s, professional suit, carrying a briefcase. "Ms. Ashford," the woman called out. "I need to speak with you." Victoria set down her hammer. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting you until next week." Your father moved up the timeline. Margaret walked over, her heels sinking into the mud with each step. She looked at Victoria's dirty clothes and blistered hands with barely concealed disapproval. "Can we speak privately?" "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Ethan." Margaret glanced at him, then back at Victoria. "Very well. Your father has filed paperwork to have you removed as VP of Acquisitions. The board votes in 2 weeks. He has the shares to make it happen." Victoria's face went very still. "On what grounds?" "Abandonment of duties. You haven't been to the office in over a week, you've missed 3 major meetings, and you're not responding to company communications." Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "He's also freezing your remaining assets. The cabin is safe because of the trust, but everything else, your car, your apartment in the city, your credit cards, all tied to the company, all revoked as of this morning." "The Mercedes outside?" Ethan asked. "Company vehicle," Victoria said quietly. "I should have known he'd take it back." Margaret held out the folder. "These are the legal documents. I recommend you sign them. If you agree to step down voluntarily and comply with your father's conditions, he'll restore your assets and give you a generous severance package." "Generous," Victoria repeated. "Meaning enough to live on if I do exactly what he says. It's better than this." Margaret gestured at the cabin, the mud, the general state of everything. "Victoria, please, be reasonable." Victoria took the folder. She opened it, scanned the first page, then the second. Ethan watched her face, trying to read her reaction, but she'd gone back to that careful mask. "Tell my father," Victoria said slowly, "that he can take his severance package and his conditions and shove them both straight to hell." Margaret blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Victoria closed the folder and handed it back. "I'm not signing. I'm not stepping down, and I'm definitely not crawling back because he took away my car and my credit cards. You'll have nothing. I have this cabin, and I have my grandfather's trust." Victoria's voice hardened. "Did you bring the documents I asked for, the original trust paperwork?" "I did, but then that's all I need from you." Victoria held out her hand. "The rest is between me and my father." Margaret hesitated, then pulled another thicker folder from her briefcase. "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I." After Margaret left, her rental car struggling back down the muddy road, Victoria sat on the porch steps and opened the second folder. Ethan gave her space, going back to work on the bedroom floor, but he could see her through the window, reading page after page with intense concentration. An hour later, she came inside. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to be honest." "Okay." "If I wanted to turn this property into something profitable, not huge but enough to live on, what would you do?" Ethan set down his saw. "What do you mean?" "The trust includes not just the cabin, but 40 acres around it. Good land, according to the survey. My father thinks it's worthless because it's remote. But I'm wondering if that's actually an advantage." Victoria leaned against the door frame. So if you had 40 acres in the Montana mountains and needed to make money from it, what would you do? Ethan thought about it. Depends on what you're good at and what you're willing to do. I'm good at acquisition and development, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Then I'd say luxury cabins. Not like this one. New construction, high-end finishes, designed for people who want to escape the city but still have amenities. You've got the location, the views, the privacy. Market it right, and you could charge premium rates. Victoria nodded slowly. How much would that cost to start? Just one cabin to prove the concept. Depends on size and finishes, but you're looking at least $100,000 for something nice. Maybe more. I don't have that kind of capital. No, but you have land. You could find investors or take out a loan using the property as collateral. My father would block any loan application. He has connections at every major bank in the state. Victoria sat on the floor, spreading out the trust documents. But there might be another way. My grandfather was smarter than my father gives him credit for. He built in clauses to protect the trust from outside interference. What kind of clauses? The kind that say if I can prove I'm using the property for legitimate business purposes, my father can't touch it, can't freeze it, can't claim I'm mismanaging it, can't do anything except watch me succeed or fail on my own merit. She looked up at Ethan. I need to file a business plan with the trust administrator, something concrete that shows I'm serious. I can help you with that, Ethan said. I've written enough proposals for contracting jobs. It's not that different. Really? Really? But Victoria, you need to understand, starting a business like this, it's not just about having a plan. It's years of work. It's risk. It's a very real chance of failure. I know. Victoria gathered up the papers, but it's mine. My choice, my risk, my potential failure. And that's worth more than anything my father could offer me. They spent the rest of the day working on the business plan. Victoria had a laptop in her duffel bag. She'd been charging it using the portable generator Ethan had brought. And between her financial knowledge and his practical experience, they hammered out a rough proposal. One luxury cabin for short-term rentals. High-end finishes, modern amenities, designed to blend with the natural surroundings. Target market. Wealthy professionals looking for a mountain escape. Projected costs, revenue, timeline for profitability. It was rough, full of assumptions and educated guesses, but it was a start. This could actually work, Victoria said, staring at the screen. Not today, not next month, but eventually. This could really work. It's a good plan, Ethan agreed. You'd need to nail the execution, but yeah, it could work. Victoria saved the document and closed her laptop. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land that was now her only asset and her biggest gamble. My father thinks I'm spoiled, she said quietly. He's not entirely wrong. I grew up with everything. Private schools, designer clothes, a credit card with no limit. I never had to worry about money or safety or whether I'd have a roof over my head. But, Ethan prompted, but I also watched him destroy anyone who disagreed with him. Business partners, competitors, even family members. My mother left when I was 16 because she couldn't take it anymore. My brother... She stopped, her voice catching. My brother stood up to him once, tried to start his own company, something that wasn't under my father's control. What happened? My father crushed him, used his connections to make sure no investor would touch him, no bank would loan him money. My brother gave up after 2 years and moved to Europe. We haven't spoken in 5 years because he can't stand to be reminded of the family. Victoria turned from the window. So, yes, I'm spoiled, but I also know exactly what I'm up against, and I'm still choosing to fight. Ethan stood and walked over to her. For what it's worth, I think you're going to win. Why? Because you hauled a 300-pound stove through the mud without complaining. Because you're learning to swing an axe even though your hands are covered in blisters. Because you're sitting in a half-destroyed cabin working on a business plan instead of accepting your father's deal. He smiled. You're tougher than he thinks. Hell, you're tougher than you think. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and hugged him. Ethan froze, surprised, then carefully put his arms around her. She was shaking slightly, and he realized she was crying, not sobbing, just quiet tears she'd probably been holding back for days. Sorry, she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I needed... It's okay. Ethan let her hold on, giving her the moment she needed. You're doing fine. Better than fine. She pulled back after a minute, wiping her eyes. I'm a mess. We're both a mess. Comes with the territory. Victoria laughed, a watery sound. I should let you go. You need to get back to Lily. Yeah, but Ethan didn't move immediately. Will you be okay here tonight? I will. I've got firewood and a working stove now. That's more than I had yesterday. The offer still stands. You could stay in town. I know, but I need to be here. This is my stand, remember? Ethan nodded. He understood that better than she probably realized. The next few days fell into a new pattern. Ethan would arrive early, they'd work on the cabin, and during breaks they'd refine the business plan. Victoria's hands toughened up, her measurements got more accurate, and slowly the cabin began to look less like a disaster and more like a home. She was sleeping on an air mattress in the bedroom, cooking simple meals on the new stove, and rationing the generator power for essential tasks. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hers, and that seemed to matter more than luxury. On the 5th day, Ethan brought Lily with him. I know you said you wanted to keep working, he told Victoria when they arrived, but I couldn't find a sitter, and it's fine, Victoria said. She knelt down to Lily's level. Hi, Lily. Remember me? You're the lady who's learning to fix houses, Lily said. That's right. Want to help? Lily looked at her father, who nodded. Okay, but I'm not very good at building stuff. Neither am I, Victoria confided, but your dad's a good teacher. They set Lily up with some scrap wood and a bucket of nails, letting her practice hammering in a safe corner of the porch. Victoria and Ethan worked on installing the new windows, a delicate job that required precision and patience. She's a good kid, Victoria said, watching Lily concentrate on her hammering. She's the best thing I ever did. Ethan measured the window frame. Even when everything else was falling apart, she gave me a reason to keep going. Does she ask about her mother? Sometimes. Less now than she used to. He positioned the window. I tell her the truth, that her mom loved her but couldn't handle being a parent, that it wasn't Lily's fault. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but it's honest. Victoria held the window steady while Ethan secured it. My mother used to tell me that my father loved me in his own way. I believed her for years. Now I think she was just trying to make herself feel better about leaving me with him. Do you talk to her? Christmas cards, birthday calls. We're polite strangers now. Victoria adjusted her grip. It's strange. You lose someone slowly like that, piece by piece, until one day you realize there's nothing left to lose. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds Lily's hammering and the wind in the pines. Then Victoria spoke again. I filed the business plan yesterday, sent it to the trust administrator with all the required documentation. How long until you hear back? 2 weeks, maybe 3. If they approve it, the trust transfers full control to me. My father can't touch it. She paused. If they don't approve it, I have nothing. They'll approve it, Ethan said. It's a solid plan. We'll see. That afternoon, while Lily napped in the truck, Victoria showed Ethan something she'd been working on. Sketches, rough but detailed, of what the property could become. Not just one cabin, but eventually 3 or 4, spread across the 40 acres. Each one designed to maximize privacy and views. A central lodge for check-ins and gatherings, hiking trails, maybe even a small event space. This is ambitious, Ethan said, studying the drawings. Too ambitious? No, it's a 5-year plan at minimum. Maybe 10. I have time. Victoria added a note to one of the sketches. And if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. Build something that lasts. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. The designer clothes were long gone, replaced by work jeans and flannel shirts. Her manicure had chipped away to nothing. She had a scar on her thumb from where she'd caught it with a saw, and her hair was usually in a messy ponytail because she couldn't be bothered with anything fancier. She looked tired and determined and more alive than she had in any of those corporate photos he'd seen online. You know what? He said. I think you're going to pull this off. Victoria smiled. From your mouth to the trust administrator's ears. The weekend brought a cold snap, the temperature dropping into the 30s at night. Ethan worried about Victoria staying in the cabin,
But when he called to check on her Saturday morning, she insisted she was fine. "I've got the stove going and about 17 blankets," she said. "I'm practically toasty." Practically toasty means you're freezing. "I'm managing. How's Lily?" "Good. We're doing errands in town. She wants to know if you need anything." There was a pause. "Actually, yes. If it's not too much trouble, can you pick up some notebook paper and maybe a few pens? I want to start sketching out interior designs for the cabins." "I can do that. Anything else?" "Just thanks, Ethan, for everything." After they hung up, Lily looked at him from the passenger seat. "She's your friend now, right? Not just work?" Ethan pulled out of the hardware store parking lot. "Yeah, Peanut, I guess she is." "Good, I like her. She's nice, and she doesn't treat me like a baby." "No, she doesn't." "Are you going to help her build those cabins she was talking about?" Ethan glanced at his daughter. "Were you eavesdropping?" "I heard you guys talking when I was on the porch. I wasn't trying to spy." Lily swung her legs. "But are you? Because that sounds really cool." "I don't know yet. It depends on a lot of things. But if you could, would you want to?" Would he? Ethan thought about it as he drove. Building luxury cabins in the mountains, creating something from nothing. Working with someone who understood the value of stubborn persistence. "Yeah," he said. "I think I would." That evening, after he dropped off the supplies at the cabin and made sure Victoria had enough firewood, Ethan sat down with his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for years. He looked up business loan applications. His contracting work was steady but small. He took jobs as they came, rarely planning more than a month ahead. But if he wanted to be a real partner in Victoria's project, not just the contractor but an actual co-owner, he'd need capital, equipment, materials, labor costs. The numbers were daunting. But as he worked through the calculations, he realized something. If Victoria's trust came through, if the business plan got approved, if they could secure even modest bookings that first year, it was possible, risky as hell, but possible. His phone rang. "Victoria." "Everything okay?" he answered. "The stove's making a weird noise, like a rattling sound." Ethan walked her through checking the vent pipe and the damper. The rattling stopped. "Crisis averted," Victoria said. "Sorry for bothering you." "You're not bothering me. That's what I'm here for." "Still, you have a life outside of fixing my problems." "Not much of one lately," Ethan admitted, "but I'm okay with that." Another pause. Then Victoria said, "I looked up your business license today. Coal Restoration Services. 1 employee. Annual revenue under $75,000. Sounds about right. You could be doing more. You're talented enough to run a bigger operation. Why stay small?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Because I like knowing everyone I work with. Because I can't afford to hire help and still make Lily's school payments. Because it's easier to stay small than risk expanding and failing." "But you want more." "I want Lily to have a better life than I did. If that means staying small and steady, I'm fine with it." "What if it didn't have to be one or the other?" Victoria's voice was careful. "What if there was a way to grow without losing what matters? Is this you offering me a job? This is me asking if you'd consider a partnership, real partnership, shared ownership, shared risk, shared decisions." She took a breath. "I need someone who knows construction and understands this area. You need capital and bigger opportunities. We could help each other." Ethan stared at the loan application still open on his screen. "That's a hell of an offer. Sleep on it. We can talk more when the trust decision comes through, if it comes through." "It will." "You sound very certain." "I am. You're too stubborn to fail." Victoria laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet house thinking about partnerships and risks and the way Victoria's eyes lit up when she talked about those cabin sketches. He was in trouble. The kind of trouble that started with business partnerships and ended with feelings he had no business having for a woman who was so far out of his league they might as well be on different planets. But as he closed his laptop and checked on Lily, who'd fallen asleep reading in her room, Ethan realized he didn't care about leagues or logic or any of the 1,000 reasons this was a bad idea. Victoria Ashford had walked into his life in designer boots in a storm of problems, and somehow, in the space of 2 weeks, she'd become someone he couldn't imagine not knowing. The cabin was almost livable now. Another few days and it would be comfortable enough for a Montana winter. The question was what happened after that. Whether Victoria would stay and fight,
or whether her father would find some new way to break her resolve. Ethan had a feeling he knew which way it would go. And when the fight came, because it was definitely coming, he planned to be standing right beside her. The partnership offer sat between them like a third presence for the next 3 days. Neither of them mentioned it directly, but Ethan caught Victoria watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, and he found himself doing the same. The work continued: window casings, floor repairs, weatherproofing, but there was a weight to every conversation now, a sense that they were both waiting for something to shift. On Tuesday morning, Ethan arrived to find Victoria on the roof. "What the hell are you doing up there?" he called out. "There's a loose shingle. I thought I could fix it." Victoria was clinging to the ladder with one hand, stretching toward the roof's edge with the other. Her face was pale. "Get down, now." "I almost have it." "Victoria, you're going to fall. Get down." She looked at him, then at the drop below, and seemed to realize how stupid this was. Carefully, she climbed back down the ladder. Her hands were shaking when she reached the ground. "I just wanted to help," she said. "I know. But roof work is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." Ethan checked the ladder to make sure it was secure, then climbed up himself. The shingle she'd been reaching for was indeed loose, along with 2 others. He fixed them in under 5 minutes, then came back down to find Victoria sitting on the porch steps, looking embarrassed. "I'm an idiot," she said. "You're not an idiot. You're just not a roofer." Ethan sat beside her. "You know what your problem is?" "I have several. Which one are we talking about?" "You think you have to do everything yourself to prove you're capable, but that's not how this works. You don't have to be good at everything. You just have to be smart enough to know when to ask for help." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "My father never asked for help. He saw it as weakness." "Your father's wrong about a lot of things. We've established this." She almost smiled. "Yeah, we have." They worked through the morning, and around noon Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her expression changed. "It's the trust administrator," she said. "Answer it." Victoria walked away from the cabin, phone pressed to her ear. Ethan watched her pace back and forth, her free hand gesturing as she talked. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt longer. When she finally hung up and turned around, her face was unreadable. "Well?" Ethan asked. "They approved it." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "The business plan, the documentation, everything. The trust transfers to my full control in 72 hours. That's good, right? That's what you wanted." "My father's going to fight it. The administrator said he's already filed an objection, claiming I'm not mentally competent to manage the trust." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Apparently wanting to live on my own terms is evidence of instability." "Can he block it?" "Not legally. The trust provisions are clear. But he can make it difficult, expensive. He'll drag it through courts, tie up the funds, make sure I spend every penny fighting him." Victoria sat down on the porch steps, suddenly looking exhausted. "I won, but it doesn't feel like winning." Ethan sat beside her. "How much are we talking about? In the trust? 200,000. My grandfather left it specifically for this property, to maintain it or develop it as I saw fit." She rubbed her eyes. "It's enough to build 1 cabin. Maybe 2 if we're careful. But if my father ties it up in legal battles, then we find another way." "There is no other way, Ethan. I don't have any other assets. This was my only shot. You have the land. You have the approved business plan. That's collateral." Ethan pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. "And I have 12,000 in savings. It's not much, but it's something." Victoria stared at him. "You can't." "I can. And before you argue, think about this. You need a partner who believes in this project enough to put skin in the game. I'm showing you I believe in it." "Ethan, that's your safety net. What about Lily? What if something happens? Then we make it work." "We always do." He looked at her. "I've been playing it safe for 7 years, being careful, staying small, never taking risks. And you know what I've got to show for it? A business that barely pays the bills and a truck that needs new brakes every 6 months. Maybe it's time to bet on something." "This is crazy." "Probably. But you asked me about the partnership. Here's my answer. I'm in." Victoria's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to let fall. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you hauled a stove through the mud. I know you're learning to chop wood with blistered hands. I know you'd rather sleep in a half-finished cabin than compromise who you are." He stood up. "That's enough for me. She grabbed his hand before he could walk away. If we do this, if we're really partners, then it's 50-50. Equal ownership, equal say, equal risk. I don't want your money unless you're getting the same deal I am. You're putting in 200,000. I'm putting in 12. You're putting in your expertise, your labor, your time. That's worth more than money. Victoria squeezed his hand. Equal partners, Ethan, or no deal. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Okay. Equal partners. Okay. They shook on it and something fundamental shifted. This wasn't just a job anymore. This wasn't even just a friendship. They were tied together now, for better or worse, and the weight of that decision settled over both of them. The next 2 days were consumed with paperwork. Victoria had her attorney, not Margaret, but someone independent her father didn't control, draw up partnership agreements. Ethan reviewed them with a lawyer friend who owed him a favor from a renovation job. Everything was above board, clean, exactly 50-50. They signed the papers on Thursday afternoon, sitting at the small table Ethan had built in the cabin's main room. Victoria's signature was elegant and precise. Ethan's was a scrawl he'd never been proud of. But they were both there, both real, both committed. To bad decisions and stubborn people, Victoria said, raising a bottle of water and a mock toast. I'll drink to that. Ethan clinked his bottle against hers. That night, he let Lily stay up late and told her about the partnership. She listened carefully, her 7-year-old face serious. So you and Victoria are going to build fancy cabins for rich people? She asked. That's the plan. And if it doesn't work, then we'll figure something else out. Lily thought about this. Okay, but can I help sometimes? I'm getting pretty good at hammering. Ethan pulled her into a hug. You can help whenever you want, Peanut. Friday brought the first real problem. Ethan was working on the cabin's electrical system when Victoria came in, her phone in her hand and her face tight with anger. My father pulled the building permits, she said. What? The permits we need to do new construction on the property. He has a friend on the county board. They're claiming there are zoning issues that need to be resolved before any development can proceed. Ethan set down his wire strippers. Are there zoning issues? No, this land has been zoned for residential development for decades. This is just my father being vindictive. Victoria paced the small room. I called the county office. They said the review could take 6 months, maybe longer. 6 months? At minimum. And we can't break ground on anything until it's resolved. Ethan ran through the implications. 6 months of delay meant 6 months of no progress, no income, no way to prove the business model worked. It meant watching their limited capital drain away on legal fees and maintenance costs while they waited for bureaucrats to process paperwork that shouldn't need processing. Can we fight it? He asked. We can try. But fighting means lawyers, and lawyers mean money we don't have. Victoria stopped pacing and looked at him. I'm sorry. I dragged you into this, and now... Stop. We're partners. That means when one of us has a problem, we both have a problem. Ethan thought for a moment. What if we don't need new construction right away? What do you mean? This cabin, it's almost livable. What if we finish it, really finish it, high-end finishes, everything, and use it as a proof of concept? Rent it out, build a track record, show that the business model works. Then when the permits finally come through, we have revenue and credibility. Victoria considered this. It's not a bad idea. But this cabin isn't big enough or nice enough for the luxury market we're targeting. Not yet. But it could be. We'd need to add a bathroom, a real one, not just the basic setup I was planning. Upgrade the kitchen, maybe build out a small deck with a view. It wouldn't be cheap, but it's cheaper than new construction, and we don't need permits for renovations to an existing structure. How much are we talking? 30,000, maybe 35, and about 2 months of solid work. Victoria pulled up her calculator app and started running numbers. If we're careful with the trust money, and if you're willing to put in sweat equity instead of charging your full rate, I'm willing. Then we could do it. We'd be broke at the end, but we could do it. And we'd have a functioning business, something real to show investors or lenders when we're ready to expand. Victoria looked around the cabin, the rough walls they'd repaired, the new windows letting in mountain light, the stove that now heated the space. It's risky. Everything's risky. At least this way we control the risk. She nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. They spent the weekend planning. Victoria worked on interior design concepts while Ethan drafted renovation plans. They argued about tile choices and argued about whether the deck should wrap around two sides or just one, and somewhere in the middle of a heated discussion about light fixtures, Ethan realized he was enjoying himself more than he had in years. Working with someone who cared as much as he did, who pushed back when she disagreed but listened when he explained his reasoning, who treated him like an equal partner instead of hired help, it was intoxicating. "You're smiling," Victoria said, looking up from her laptop. "Am I?" "Yeah, what's funny?" "Nothing. This is good. This feels right." Victoria smiled back. "Yeah, it does." On Monday, they started the serious renovations. Ethan brought in a plumber friend to help with the bathroom addition. Victoria spent hours online sourcing materials, finding deals, negotiating with suppliers who'd never heard of her but were impressed by her professionalism. The work was hard and the days were long. Ethan was putting in 12, sometimes 14 hours, running between the cabin and his other contracting jobs, trying to keep both plates spinning. Victoria was living on the site now full-time, and Ethan worried about her being alone up there, but she insisted she was fine. "I have a working stove, a roof that doesn't leak, and a door that locks," she said. "I've stayed in 5-star hotels with worse security." On Tuesday night, Lily asked if she could visit the cabin again. "I want to see how it looks now," she said, "and I miss Victoria." So Wednesday afternoon, Ethan brought her along. They found Victoria in the bathroom area, helping the plumber install the shower pan. She was covered in dust and tile adhesive, but her face lit up when she saw Lily. "Hey kid, come to inspect our work? Dad says you're making this place really fancy." "We're trying. Want to see the bedroom? We just finished the flooring." Victoria showed Lily around, explaining what they'd done and what was still left to do. Lily asked questions, and Victoria answered them seriously, never talking down or oversimplifying. Watching them together, Ethan felt something warm settle in his chest. After Lily went outside to explore, Victoria sat beside Ethan on what would eventually be the living room couch. "She's a great kid," Victoria said. "She likes you. That's not common. Lily's pretty guarded around new people. Wonder where she gets that from." Ethan smiled. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Lily's voice as she talked to herself outside, narrating some elaborate game she was playing. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said. "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? Choosing to raise her alone instead of, trying to make it work with her mother?" Ethan thought about Sarah. The fights, the ultimatums, the way she'd looked at him like he was a burden she couldn't wait to drop. No, Sarah didn't want to be a mother. She tried for a while, but her heart wasn't in it. It was better for everyone when she left. Still, that must have been hard. Hardest thing I've ever done. But you know what? I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because Lily's worth it. Every sleepless night, every panic attack about money, every time I thought I was screwing it all up, it's worth it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to think I wanted kids. Then I spent so much time focused on the company, on proving myself to my father, that it just never happened. Now I'm 30 and single and starting over from nothing, and I wonder if I missed my chance." 30 isn't old. It feels old sometimes. You're running a business and living in the woods and learning to install shower pans. That doesn't sound old to me. That sounds like someone who's just getting started. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, and Ethan went very still. It was a casual gesture, friendly, but it made his heart race anyway. "Thanks," she said quietly, "for believing in me when I barely believed in myself." "That goes both ways." They stayed like that until Lily came back inside, chattering about a deer she'd seen. Victoria sat up and the moment passed, but something had changed. Some line they'd been carefully not crossing had gotten blurrier. Thursday night, the stove broke. Ethan had left around 6, needing to get Lily home for dinner. Victoria was planning to make pasta and work on furniture layouts. Everything seemed fine. At 2 in the morning, his phone rang. "Ethan," Victoria's voice was rough, scared. "Something's wrong with the stove. There's smoke everywhere, and I can't breathe right." Ethan was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she finished the sentence. "Get outside, right now. Don't try to fix it. Just get out of the cabin." "I'm trying. The door's stuck." "What?" "It's swollen from the humidity. I can't get it open." She coughed, hard. Ethan, I can't. The line went dead. Ethan called 911 as he ran to his truck, giving them the address, telling them there was carbon monoxide, a woman trapped inside. The dispatcher said they'd send emergency services, but Ethan knew how long it took to get up that mountain road. 20 minutes, maybe 30 in the dark. Victoria didn't have 30 minutes. He drove faster than he'd ever driven, the truck fishtailing on curves, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He tried calling Victoria back, but she didn't answer. He tried again. Nothing. The drive took 14 minutes. It felt like hours. The cabin lights were on when he arrived, and smoke was seeping out around the door frame. Ethan grabbed a crowbar from his truck and ran to the door. It was swollen shut, just like Victoria had said. He jammed the crowbar into the gap and pried with everything he had. The door popped open and smoke billowed out. Ethan ducked low and went inside. Victoria was on the floor near the couch, unconscious. The stove was pouring out dark smoke. The vent pipe had come loose, filling the cabin with carbon monoxide and combustion gases. Ethan grabbed Victoria under her arms and dragged her toward the door. She was breathing, but barely. He got her outside, away from the cabin, and laid her on the ground in the clearing. Victoria, wake up. He checked her pulse. It was there, but weak. Her skin was pale, lips slightly blue. He started rescue breathing, tilting her head back, giving her 2 breaths. Then he waited, watching her chest. She coughed, gasped. Her eyes opened, unfocused. That's it. Breathe. Just breathe. Victoria coughed again, harder this time, her body convulsing with the effort. Ethan rolled her onto her side and let her cough it out, one hand on her back. In the distance, he could hear sirens. The emergency services were coming, but Victoria was breathing on her own now. She was going to be okay. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. The cabin? Forget the cabin. Are you hurt? I don't know. She tried to sit up and swayed. Ethan caught her. Easy, just stay still. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, followed by the volunteer fire department. They put Victoria on oxygen, checked her vitals, asked her questions about what happened. Ethan explained about the stove, about finding her unconscious. One of the firefighters went into the cabin to shut everything down and make sure there was no fire risk. He came back out shaking his head. The vent pipe wasn't secured properly, probably vibrated loose over the last few days. You're lucky you woke up when you did, ma'am. Another 20 minutes and... He didn't finish the sentence. Victoria closed her eyes. It's my fault. I noticed it was a little loose yesterday, but I thought I could fix it myself. When? Ethan asked. Yesterday afternoon, after you left. I tightened the clamps, but I guess I didn't do it right. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were already doing so much. Because I wanted to prove I could handle things myself. Her voice broke. I almost died because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Hey! Ethan knelt beside the stretcher the paramedics had set up. You didn't die. You're okay. Only because you got here in time. Then I got here in time. That's what matters. The paramedics wanted to take Victoria to the hospital for observation, but she refused. Her oxygen levels were back to normal, and she had no other injuries. They made her sign a waiver, gave her strict instructions to rest and call if she felt dizzy or nauseous, and finally left. The firefighters stayed longer, making sure the cabin was safe. They recommended having a professional inspect the entire stove system before using it again. Ethan nodded, knowing that was going to cost money they didn't have, but not caring. Victoria's life was worth more than any budget. After everyone left, they sat in the clearing as the sun started to rise over the mountains. Victoria was wrapped in a blanket, still pale, but steady. Ethan sat beside her, exhausted and wired, and trying not to think about what could have happened. I keep screwing up, Victoria said quietly. First the roof, now this. I'm going to get myself killed trying to prove something. You're learning. That's different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm just reckless and stupid. Ethan turned to face her. You're not stupid. You're stubborn, yeah, but that's what got you this far. The problem is you're still trying to do everything alone. I have you. I know. But you won't let me help with everything. You won't tell me when something's wrong because you think it makes you weak. He took her hand. We're partners, Victoria. That means when the stove's loose, you tell me. When you're scared or overwhelmed or out of your depth, you tell me. That's not weakness. That's trust. Tears slid down Victoria's cheeks. I don't know how to do that. I've never had anyone I could trust like that. Then learn. I'll be patient. They sat together as full daylight came, the cabin behind them dark and quiet. Victoria leaned against Ethan's shoulder again, and this time he put his arm around her, holding her steady. Thank you for coming, she whispered, for saving me. Always, Ethan said. And he meant it. Victoria stayed at Ethan's house that night. He'd insisted, and for once she didn't argue. She was too exhausted, her lungs still raw from the smoke, her hands shaking every time she closed her eyes and remembered waking up on the cabin floor, unable to breathe. Ethan gave her his bed and took the couch. Lily had woken up when they came in, and after Ethan explained what happened, leaving out the worst parts, she'd climbed into bed with Victoria and refused to leave. I don't want her to be alone, Lily had said, and that was that. So Victoria fell asleep with a 7-year-old curled against her side, and when she woke up late the next morning, Lily was still there, one small hand clutching Victoria's shirt, like she was afraid she might disappear. Victoria's throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time someone had worried about her like this. Not as an asset or a business advantage, but as a person worth protecting. She carefully extracted herself from the bed and found Ethan in the kitchen, making pancakes. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. You didn't have to give up your bed, Victoria said. Yeah, I did. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, but alive. She sat at the small kitchen table. I'm sorry for ruining your night. You didn't ruin anything. You scared the hell out of me, but that's different. Ethan flipped a pancake. I called a stove inspector first thing this morning. He can come out Monday to look at the whole system. How much? Don't worry about it right now. Ethan, I said don't worry about it. His voice was firm. We'll figure out the money. Right now, you need to rest. Victoria wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she watched him cook. This man who'd dragged her out of a smoke-filled cabin at 2 a.m. and was now making her breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily wandered in, rubbing her eyes. She climbed into Victoria's lap without asking, and Victoria found herself holding the little girl, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. Are you going to be okay? Lily asked. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm okay. Good. Because Dad was really scared. I heard him on the phone with 911. Victoria met Ethan's eyes over Lily's head. He looked away first, focusing on the pancakes. They spent the day quietly. Ethan had canceled his other jobs for the weekend, and Victoria was under strict orders not to think about work. So they watched movies with Lily, played board games, and ate too much junk food. It was the most normal day Victoria had experienced in months, maybe years. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Victoria and Ethan sat on the porch. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. I need to tell you something, Victoria said. Okay. When I was lying on that floor when I couldn't breathe, I wasn't thinking about the business or my father or any of it. I was thinking about how I'd dragged you into this mess, how you'd put your money and your future on the line for me, and I was about to die in a stupid accident because I was too proud to ask for help. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I was thinking about Lily losing someone else who'd just come into her life, about you having to explain to her why I wasn't coming back. Victoria, let me finish. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I don't need anyone, that I'm strong enough and smart enough to handle everything myself, and it almost killed me. She turned to look at him. So I'm done with that. I'm asking for help. I'm admitting that I can't do this alone, and I'm trusting you to be honest with me when I'm about to do something stupid. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're not stupid. Stubborn, reckless sometimes, but not stupid. Same thing, in this case. No, it's not. Stupid would be giving up. Stupid would be going back to your father and letting him win. He shifted to face her. You're fighting for something you believe in. You're just learning that fighting doesn't mean doing it alone. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes again. She'd cried more in the last 24 hours than she had in the last 10 years. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. The partnership, the trust, the business, I can handle all that. But the personal stuff? Letting people in, being vulnerable, admitting when I'm scared, I'm terrible at it. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do. Is that all we are? The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it. Partners? Ethan went very still. What do you want us to be? Victoria's heart was pounding. This was dangerous territory, the kind that could ruin everything they'd built. But after last night, after nearly dying alone in that cabin, she was done playing it safe. I don't know, she said honestly. But I know that when I woke up and saw you there, I felt safer than I felt in my entire life. And I know that working with you is the best part of my day. And I know that Lily is the sweetest kid I've ever met, and watching you with her makes me want things I didn't think I wanted anymore. Ethan stood up abruptly. Victoria's stomach dropped, thinking she'd ruined it, pushed too hard, too fast. But then he held out his hand. Come here. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. He didn't let go. I have a daughter, he said, and a business that barely breaks even, and a truck that needs work every other month. I live in a 2-bedroom house in a town with 1 stoplight, and I probably always will. I'm not ambitious like you. I'm not smooth or sophisticated, and I definitely don't run in the same circles as billionaires. I don't care about any of that. I know. That's what scares me. He squeezed her hand. Because I'm falling for you, Victoria. Have been for a while now, and that complicates everything. Victoria's breath caught. Does it have to? You tell me. Can you see yourself here? Really here? Not just hiding from your father, but actually building a life in Montana with a contractor and his kid? I'm already building a life here. The business, the cabin, all of it. That's not temporary for me. That's the future I want. What about us? Is that temporary? Victoria stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him despite the cold night air. I don't know what we are yet, but I know I want to find out, if you do. Ethan cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. Yeah, I do. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Victoria leaned into it, her hands coming up to grip his jacket, and kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. This is going to be complicated, he said. Everything worth doing is complicated. We should probably take it slow, for Lily's sake. Agreed. And we need to keep the business stuff separate from the personal stuff. Also agreed? Okay? Good. Ethan kissed her again, longer this time. When they broke apart, he was smiling. Just wanted to make sure we had rules before we completely ignored them. Victoria laughed, and it felt good, felt right. You're ridiculous. You're the one who almost died from a stove malfunction. Too soon. Probably. But he was still smiling, and so was she. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, hands linked, not talking about the future or the business, or any of the complications waiting for them, just being together in the quiet night. The stove inspector came out Monday morning and confirmed what the firefighters had suspected. The vent pipe installation was faulty. Not Ethan's work, but the original installation from whoever had set it up years ago. Victoria's attempt to tighten it had actually made it worse, creating gaps that let the combustion gases flow back into the cabin. You're lucky to be alive, the inspector said, not for the first time. The whole system needed to be replaced. $3,000 minimum. Victoria and Ethan looked at their budget spreadsheet and tried to figure out where that money was going to come from. We could delay some of the cosmetic work, Victoria suggested. Use basic fixtures instead of the upgraded ones. That defeats the purpose. We're trying to market this as luxury. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I could take on an extra job. There's a guy in town who needs his garage rebuilt. When you're already working 14-hour days. I'll make it work. Victoria started to argue, then stopped. Her phone was ringing. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Victoria Ashford. Ms. Ashford, this is David Chen from First Montana Bank. I'm calling about the business loan application you submitted last month. Victoria's heart jumped. She'd almost forgotten about that application. She'd filed it before everything went sideways with her father, before the partnership, when she was still trying to do everything herself. I remember, she said carefully. I'm pleased to inform you that your application has been approved. We're prepared to offer you a line of credit up to $75,000 at 6% interest, secured against your property. Victoria sat down hard. What? Your business plan was very thorough, and the property appraisal came back higher than expected. The trust approval helped as well. We think you have a viable business model. Papers rustled on the other end. Of course, we'll need to finalize some paperwork, but if you're still interested, I'm interested. Victoria's mind was racing. Can I ask, my father didn't try to block this? We had an inquiry from Ashford Properties about 3 weeks ago, but our lending decisions are based on individual creditworthiness and business viability, not family relationships. Your application stood on its own merit. After she hung up, Victoria just sat there, staring at her phone. Ethan watched her, concerned. What happened? We got a loan, $75,000. You're joking. I'm not. Victoria showed him her phone, the call log proving it was real. I applied weeks ago before any of this. I didn't think it would go through, especially after my father started freezing my assets. But it did. It did. Victoria started laughing, half hysterical. We can replace the stove. We can upgrade everything. We can actually do this right. Ethan pulled her into a hug, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. We can do this right. They spent the rest of the day replanning. With the loan, they could afford proper finishes, professional appliances, everything they'd been cutting corners on. The cabin could actually be what they'd envisioned, a genuine luxury retreat, something they could charge premium rates for. Victoria called the bank back that afternoon and started the paperwork process. It would take about 2 weeks to finalize everything, but the loan officer assured her it was just a formality. Your credit is excellent, Ms. Ashford. Even without access to your father's money, you've maintained perfect payment history on your personal accounts. That counts for a lot. After the call, Victoria sat on the cabin's porch and looked out at the mountains. She'd maintained those personal accounts, a credit card, a small checking account, as a backup plan, never thinking they'd actually matter. But they had. Her own responsibility, her own credit history, completely separate from her father's empire. She'd been building her own foundation without even realizing it. Ethan found her there an hour later, just sitting and thinking. You okay? He asked. Better than okay? I just realized something. What's that? My father's been trying to control me by controlling my money, but I don't need his money. I never did. I just needed to believe in myself enough to build something on my own. She stood up. The trust, the loan, the partnership, none of it involves him. I did this, we did this, and he can't touch it. He can still make trouble with the permits. Let him. We'll deal with it when the time comes. Victoria turned to Ethan. But right now we have a cabin to finish and a business to launch. That's what matters. They worked through the next 2 weeks with renewed energy. The loan came through exactly as promised, and they immediately ordered the new stove system. This time Ethan installed it himself, triple-checking every connection, every vent, every seal. Paranoid much? Victoria teased, watching him inspect the vent pipe for the 4th time. You almost died. I'm allowed to be paranoid. The bathroom came together beautifully. Victoria had designed it with a walk-in shower that had a rain head and a view of the mountains through a frosted window. Heated floors, natural stone tile. It looked like something out of a magazine. The kitchen got upgraded appliances and a small island with seating for 2. The bedroom received a king-size bed and custom-built shelving. The main living area got a stone fireplace that Ethan built by hand, each rock carefully selected and placed. It was exhausting work, but it was theirs. Lily came by most afternoons after school, doing homework at the new kitchen island while Victoria and Ethan worked. She'd become a fixture, chattering about her day, helping with small tasks, drawing pictures of what the cabin would look like when it was done. Victoria found herself looking forward to those afternoons more than she wanted to admit. The 3 of them together felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain. One evening, while Ethan was outside bringing in firewood and Lily was putting away her homework, the little girl looked up at Victoria. Are you my dad's girlfriend now? Victoria froze. That's complicated, sweetheart. Emma's mom says when grown-ups like each other, they become boyfriend and girlfriend. Do you like my dad? Yes, very much. Does he like you? I think so. Lily nodded, satisfied. Then you're his girlfriend. That's how it works. It's a little more complicated than that when there are kids involved. We have to make sure I'm okay with it? Lily interrupted. I am. You're nice and you make Dad smile more. He hasn't smiled this much since before Mom left. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Thank you, Lily. You're welcome. Can I call you something besides Victoria? It feels weird. What would you like to call me? Lily thought about it. V? Like the letter? That's what my dad calls you sometimes when he doesn't think I'm listening. Victoria laughed. V works. I like it. When Ethan came back inside, arms full of firewood, he found them making hot chocolate together, Lily chattering about her friend's birthday party next week and whether Victoria would want to come. He caught Victoria's eye over Lily's head, and she smiled. They hadn't talked about what they were to each other, hadn't put labels on anything. But watching his daughter fold Victoria into their lives like she'd always been there, that felt like an answer all its own. 3 weeks after the stove incident, Victoria received an email from the trust administrator. Her father had dropped his objection. No explanation, no communication, just a formal withdrawal of his legal challenge.
What does this mean? Ethan asked, reading over her shoulder.
It means he's given up.
Or he's planning something else. Victoria closed her laptop. Honestly, I don't care which. The trust is mine. He can't touch it. But that night, alone in the cabin, which was nearly finished now, warm and safe and beautiful, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that her father's silence was more dangerous than his attacks had been. Robert Ashford didn't give up. He regrouped, and she had no idea what he was planning. Her phone rang at midnight. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID said Margaret Chen, her attorney. It's late, Margaret. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to hear this now. Margaret's voice was tense. Your father's filing for a competency hearing. He's claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the trust or make business decisions. Victoria went cold. On what grounds? Risk-taking behavior, financial irresponsibility. The carbon monoxide incident, he's spinning it as a suicide attempt. That's insane. It was an accident. I know. But he's got doctors who will testify about depression, erratic behavior, emotional instability. He's building a case that you're a danger to yourself and need to be placed under a conservatorship. His conservatorship. Victoria sank onto the couch. Can he do that? He can try, and with his resources and connections, he might succeed. The hearing's in 2 weeks. Margaret paused. Victoria, I have to ask, is there any truth to his claims? Any history of mental health issues he could exploit? No, I've been stressed, sure, but I'm not unstable. I'm not suicidal. I'm just trying to live my own life. Then we fight it, but you need to be prepared. He's going to drag everything into court. Your move to the cabin, the partnership with Ethan, your financial decisions. He'll try to paint you as irrational and impulsive. After they hung up, Victoria sat in the dark cabin, trying not to panic. This was worse than frozen assets or blocked permits. If her father won a conservatorship, he'd control everything. Her money, her business, her life. She'd be right back where she started, except this time with a legal declaration that she was incompetent. She called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. Victoria, what's wrong? She told him everything. The competency hearing, the conservatorship threat, the doctors her father had lined up to testify against her. He can't do this, Ethan said, fully awake now. You're not incompetent. Anyone who's seen you work, seen what you've built, it doesn't matter what's true. It matters what he can prove. And he's got resources I don't have. Then we get our own doctors, our own evidence. We show the court what you've actually accomplished. With what money? The loan's already committed to the cabin renovation. I can't afford a legal battle like this. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The cabin's almost done. We could launch early, start taking bookings now, show the court you're running a viable business. It's not ready for guests. It's close, another week of work, and it could be. Victoria could hear him moving around, probably getting dressed. I'm coming over. We're going to figure this out. Ethan, it's midnight. I don't care. You're not dealing with this alone. He showed up 20 minutes later with his laptop and a thermos of coffee. They sat at the kitchen island, the one they'd installed together, argued over the height of, finally agreed was perfect, and started planning. They'd soft launch the cabin in 1 week. Take photos, build a website, start marketing it as a luxury mountain retreat. If they could show bookings, revenue, positive reviews, even just a few, it would prove Victoria was running a successful business, not spiraling into incompetence. It's risky, Victoria said. What if we get a guest and something goes wrong? What if the place isn't ready? Then we deal with it. But doing nothing is riskier. Ethan pulled up his phone. I know a photographer who owes me a favor, and my sister-in-law does web design.
Between the two of them, we can have this place looking professional by the weekend. Your sister-in-law? Sarah's sister. We stayed in touch after the divorce. She's good people. They worked through the night, building a plan. By sunrise, they had a timeline, a marketing strategy, and a list of everything that needed to be finished before they could accept their first guest. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was a chance. Ethan left at 7 to take Lily to school. Victoria stayed at the cabin, exhausted but wired, and started making calls. The photographer could come tomorrow. The web designer needed 3 days but would expedite for family rates. A friend from Victoria's old life, one of the few who'd stayed in touch, said she'd write the marketing copy in exchange for a free weekend stay. By noon, Victoria had a launch plan. By evening, she had a website framework. By the time Ethan came back with Lily, she'd secured their first booking. Already? Ethan stared at the confirmation email. How? I posted in a luxury travel group I'm part of. Mentioned we were doing a soft launch, limited availability. Someone bid immediately. Victoria grinned, giddy with exhaustion and success. They're coming next weekend, 3 nights, full rate. Lily looked at the computer screen. That's a lot of money. It is, Victoria agreed. And if they have a good time, they'll tell other people. That's how we build a reputation. What if they don't have a good time? Lily asked. Victoria and Ethan exchanged glances. That was the question, wasn't it? Everything was riding on this first guest experience. Not just the business, but Victoria's entire future. Then we make sure they do, Ethan said firmly. We've got 1 week. Let's make it count. They worked like they'd never worked before. Ethan finished the fireplace mantle, installed the light fixtures, touched up paint. Victoria sourced linens and towels, stocked the kitchen with basics, created a welcome basket with local products. They argued over whether the deck furniture should be teak or cedar, whether the throw pillows should be blue or gray, whether they needed blackout curtains or could get away with blinds. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Victoria realized she was happy. Exhausted, stressed, terrified about the hearing, but happy. Building something with her own hands, making decisions that mattered, fighting for a future she actually wanted instead of one that had been chosen for her. Even if her father won, even if she lost everything, she'd had this. And that was worth fighting for. The photographer came on Thursday and spent 6 hours capturing every angle of the cabin. The shots were stunning, sunlight streaming through the new windows, the stone fireplace glowing warm in the evening light, the bathroom that looked like a spa, the view from the deck that made you feel like you were alone in the wilderness. The website went live Friday afternoon. Victoria and Ethan sat side by side, watching the visitor counter tick up as people discovered the site. It's working, Victoria breathed. People are actually interested. Of course they are. Look at this place. Ethan gestured around the cabin. We built something amazing. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. We did, didn't we? The first guest arrived Saturday morning, 2 weeks before Victoria's competency hearing, and exactly 1 month after she'd signed the partnership papers with Ethan. Everything was riding on the next 3 days. And for the first time in her life, Victoria felt ready for whatever came next. The guest was a woman named Jennifer Park, a tech executive from Seattle who looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. She pulled up in a rental SUV with dark circles under her eyes, and the kind of tension that came from too many conference calls and not enough fresh air. Victoria met her at the cabin entrance, nerves jangling but smile firmly in place. This had to go perfectly. Everything depended on it. Welcome to Ashford Mountain Retreat, Victoria said, using the name they'd settled on after an hour-long debate about whether it sounded too pretentious. I'm Victoria, one of the owners. Jennifer looked around, taking in the cabin's exterior, the deck with its mountain views, the careful landscaping Ethan had done in the last frantic week. Her expression was unreadable. It's beautiful, she said finally, and Victoria felt something unclench in her chest. Even better than the photos. Victoria showed her around, pointing out the features they'd worked so hard to perfect. The heated bathroom floors, the fireplace with its custom stonework, the kitchen stocked with local coffee and fresh pastries from the bakery in town, the deck where you could watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. Jennifer set her bag down in the bedroom and turned to Victoria. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why'd you only charge half of what I'd pay for something like this in Aspen or Jackson Hole? Victoria had agonized over the pricing,
Go too high, and nobody would risk an unknown property. Go too low, and they'd seem desperate or cheap. They'd settled on a middle ground, premium but not outrageous. We're new, Victoria said honestly. We're building a reputation. If you have a great experience, you'll tell people. That's worth more to us right now than maximizing rates. Jennifer nodded slowly. Smart and honest. I appreciate that. She looked around again. I'm going to be straight with you. I almost canceled this morning. My assistant thought I was crazy for booking some random cabin in Montana based on a website that's been live for 3 days. But I needed to get away, and something about your listing felt genuine. It is genuine. Everything you see here, my partner and I built with our own hands. Your partner being the guy in the photos, the one who looks like he actually knows which end of a hammer to hold? Victoria smiled despite herself. That's Ethan. He's the builder. I'm figuring out what I am, but we're doing this together. Good for you. Most people talk about building something. You actually did it. Jennifer pulled out her laptop. I'm supposed to be unplugging, but I have one call I need to take in about an hour. Is the Wi-Fi reliable? It is. Password's on the welcome card on the counter. After Victoria left, she sat in her car for a full 5 minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel. One guest, 1 3-night stay. It shouldn't feel this momentous, but it did. The stranger from Seattle was their proof of concept, their evidence that the business could work, their best weapon against Victoria's father. She drove to Ethan's house and found him in the garage, building a bookshelf for Lily's room. He looked up when she came in, saw her face, and set down his sander. How'd it go? She liked it. She said it was even better than the photos. Ethan pulled her into a hug. Of course she did. We built something great. Victoria held on tighter than she meant to. What if something goes wrong? What if the water heater breaks, or she hates the mattress, or... Then we fix it. That's what we do. He pulled back enough to look at her. You need to breathe. We've done everything we can. Now we trust that it's enough. Lily appeared in the garage doorway, covered in what looked like marker ink. V, I'm drawing pictures of the cabin to put on the website. Want to see? Victoria let Ethan go and followed Lily inside. The pictures were enthusiastic, if not particularly accurate. The cabin had somehow gained a tower and what might have been a dragon, but they made Victoria laugh for the first time all day. These are perfect, she said. We should definitely put them on the website. Really? Lily's face lit up. Really? Every great business needs original art. That night, Victoria's phone rang. Jennifer Park. Her stomach dropped. Something had gone wrong. The heat wasn't working, or the roof was leaking, or... Hi, Victoria. Sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask about dinner recommendations. I'm not really in the mood to drive into town. Victoria exhaled. There's a steak in the fridge, grass-fed, local, and I left a salad kit and a bottle of wine. If you want to cook, the grill on the deck works great. You left me a steak? We thought you might want the option to stay in. There's also a list of delivery places, but honestly, the town's small enough that delivery can take a while. There was a pause. Then Jennifer said, You know what? A steak on the deck watching the sunset sounds perfect. Thanks. After she hung up, Victoria texted Ethan. She's grilling the steak. I think we're okay. His response came immediately. Told you. Now stop worrying and get some sleep. But Victoria couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, still at Ethan's house because the cabin was occupied and somehow she'd just never left, and stared at the ceiling. In 2 weeks, she'd be in court. Her father would have lawyers and doctors and carefully crafted arguments about why she was incompetent to manage her own life. And she'd have what? A cabin that had been open for business for exactly 1 day? A partnership with a small-town contractor? A business plan and a dream? It didn't feel like enough. Sunday morning, Jennifer texted asking if there were hiking trails nearby. Victoria sent her a map and recommendations based on difficulty level. Jennifer went for a moderate trail and came back 4 hours later, posting photos on her Instagram of the mountain views with the caption, Found Paradise in Montana. Monday, she asked if she could extend her stay by 2 days. Victoria said yes before even checking with Ethan. You're sure? Ethan asked when she told him. We've got those inspection records to organize for the hearing. We can work around her. And Ethan, she's posting about the cabin. Her Instagram has 40,000 followers. That's free marketing we couldn't buy. By Tuesday, Jennifer had written a full review on 3 different travel sites, 5 stars across the board.
She called the cabin a hidden gem and exactly what burned-out executives need. She mentioned the attention to detail, the mountain views, the fact that the owners had clearly put their hearts into the place. Victoria read the reviews 5 times, then called Margaret. "We've got our first guest review, 5 stars. And she's extended her stay. That's proof the business is viable, right?" "It helps," Margaret said carefully. "But Victoria, you need to understand what we're up against. Your father's claiming a pattern of instability. One successful week doesn't erase that narrative in a judge's eyes." "Then what do I need?" "Character witnesses. People who can testify that you're rational, stable, capable, preferably people with credibility, professionals, community members, that sort of thing." After they hung up, Victoria made a list. It was depressingly short. She'd burned so many bridges in her old life, and her new life in Montana was barely a month old. Who did she know who'd be willing to stand up in court for her? Ethan, obviously, but he was her business partner and whatever they were becoming. The judge might see him as biased. Maggie, from the diner? They'd only met a handful of times. Mrs. Chen, Ethan's neighbor, same problem. Victoria was staring at the list when Lily came home from school. She climbed onto the couch next to Victoria and peered at the paper. "What's that?" "Just some work stuff." "It says people who like me. That's not work." Victoria sighed. She'd forgotten how literal 7-year-olds could be. "I have to go to court soon. I need people to tell the judge I'm a good person." "Why wouldn't they think you're a good person?" "Because my father's going to say I'm not. That I'm not smart enough or responsible enough to take care of myself." Lily frowned. "But that's not true. You built a whole cabin, and you know how to fix toilets now, and you make really good hot chocolate." Despite everything, Victoria smiled. "Thanks, sweetheart. But I don't think the judge will care about my hot chocolate skills." "They should. It's important." Lily thought for a moment. "What about Dad? He thinks you're responsible. He said so when he was talking to Mrs. Chen." "He did?" "Yeah, she said you were going to break his heart because rich people always leave, and he said you weren't like that. That you were the most responsible person he knew, except you were still learning not to be stubborn about asking for help." Victoria's throat tightened. "When was this?" "Last week. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I was getting my ball from Mrs. Chen's yard." Lily swung her legs. "Are you going to break his heart?" "I hope not. I don't want to." "Good. Because he really likes you. He smiles different when you're around." That evening, after Lily went to bed, Victoria told Ethan what she'd said. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking embarrassed. "Mrs. Chen worries, she means well. But is she right? Am I going to break your heart?" Ethan met her eyes. "Are you planning to leave when this gets hard?" "No." "Are you using me as a convenient rebound from your father's control?" "No." "Then I'm not worried." He reached across the couch and took her hand. "You're not your father, Victoria. You don't manipulate people or treat them as disposable. That's not who you are." "How do you know? You've only known me for a month." "I know because I've watched you. I've seen how you treat Lily, how you work, how you handle problems. I've seen who you are when nobody's watching, and you don't have anything to prove." He squeezed her hand. "That's enough for me." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that until the late-night talk shows came on TV. Wednesday brought their second booking, a couple from California looking for an anniversary getaway in 2 weeks. Thursday brought a third, a family wanting spring break accommodations. By Friday, they had enough reservations to project revenue for the next 3 months. Margaret reviewed the numbers and nodded approvingly. "This helps. Bring all the booking confirmations, the reviews, your financial projections. We'll build the case that you're running a successful business." The competency hearing was set for Monday morning. Victoria spent the weekend preparing, rehearsing answers to questions Margaret thought the opposing lawyers might ask. Ethan drilled her on financial details until she could recite their business model in her sleep. Sunday night, Jennifer Park checked out. She hugged Victoria on her way to the car. "Thank you," she said. "I came here because I needed a break. I'm leaving because I remembered what it feels like to build something meaningful. You and your partner, you're doing something real here. Don't let anyone tell you different." After she drove away, Victoria stood in the clearing and looked at the cabin. Their cabin, the one they'd built from wreckage and stubbornness and maybe something like hope. Whatever happened tomorrow, they'd done this, and nobody could take that away. The courthouse in Helena was smaller than Victoria expected. Plain brick, functional, nothing like the imposing structures where her father usually conducted his legal warfare. She sat next to Margaret at the defendant's table, although technically she wasn't defending anything, just her right to be a functional adult, and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Robert Ashford sat across the aisle with 3 attorneys. He didn't look at her once. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Karen Reeves. She reviewed the paperwork with the kind of thoroughness that suggested she didn't take conservatorship petitions lightly. "Mr. Ashford," she said finally, "you're petitioning for conservatorship over your daughter on the grounds that she's mentally incompetent to manage her affairs. That's a serious allegation." Robert's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence of a pattern of reckless behavior. Ms. Ashford abandoned a lucrative career, moved to an isolated cabin with no utilities, nearly died in a carbon monoxide incident that may have been a suicide attempt." "It was an accident," Margaret interrupted. "The fire department's report clearly states..." "The report states that Ms. Ashford attempted to repair gas appliances without proper training, creating a dangerous situation. That's precisely the kind of impulsive, reckless decision-making that concerns us." The judge held up a hand. "I've read the fire department report. Ms. Chen, do you have evidence that contradicts Mr. Ashford's claims?" Margaret stood. "We have evidence that Ms. Ashford has, in the span of 6 weeks, launched a successful business, secured independent financing, and generated revenue. She's not reckless, she's entrepreneurial, and there's a significant difference." "Entrepreneurial?" Robert's attorney scoffed. "She's living in a cabin in the woods, playing at being a businesswoman with money from a trust she inherited. That's not entrepreneurship. That's a trust fund baby having a breakdown." Victoria felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder. He was sitting in the gallery, technically not part of the proceedings, but Margaret had arranged for him to be there as a witness if needed. "Your Honor," Margaret said, "I'd like to call Ethan Cole to testify about Ms. Ashford's business acumen and mental state." The judge nodded. Ethan stood and walked to the witness stand, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably hadn't been worn since his wedding. But when he was sworn in and Margaret started asking questions, his voice was steady. "How long have you known Ms. Ashford?" "About 6 weeks." "And in what capacity?" "I was hired to renovate a cabin she inherited. Then we became business partners." "Business partners?" Margaret repeated. "Can you describe the nature of this partnership?" Ethan explained the business model, the renovations, the bookings they'd secured. He walked through their financial projections, their marketing strategy, their plans for expansion. He sounded professional and knowledgeable. Nothing like the contractor in work boots Victoria had first met. "In your professional opinion," Margaret asked, "is Ms. Ashford competent to run a business?" "Absolutely. She's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. She taught herself construction basics in a few weeks. She negotiated supplier contracts that saved us thousands. She designed a marketing strategy that got us booked solid for the next 3 months." He paused. "She's not reckless. She's the opposite. She thinks through every decision, sometimes too much. If anything, I have to remind her to trust her instincts." Robert's attorney stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Cole, you have a financial stake in defending Ms. Ashford, don't you? If she's declared incompetent, your business partnership dissolves." "That's true." "So you're hardly an objective witness." "I'm objective about her competence. I've worked with dozens of clients over the years. I can tell the difference between someone who's unstable and someone who's just fighting for their independence." "Fighting?" The attorney pounced. "So you acknowledge she's in conflict with her family?" "I acknowledge that her father is trying to control her, and she's choosing not to let him." "Isn't it possible that this choice, as you call it, is actually evidence of poor judgment? Ms. Ashford had a comfortable life, a prestigious position, financial security. She gave it all up to live in a cabin and play at being a contractor. Does that sound like good judgment to you?" Ethan looked directly at Robert Ashford. "It sounds like someone who'd rather build something real than live in a gold cage." "Yeah, I'd call that good judgment." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Margaret asked a few more questions, establishing that Ethan had seen no evidence of mental instability, depression, or suicidal ideation. Then he was excused. The judge called for a 30-minute recess. Victoria followed Margaret into a small conference room, Ethan trailing behind. "How bad is it?" Victoria asked. "It's not over yet. They're going to call their doctors next. psychiatrists who'll testify about your supposed mental state based on records and interviews with your father. We'll counter with the business evidence and hopefully get the judge to see that you're rational and functioning. Hopefully? Margaret's expression was grim. I won't lie to you, Victoria. Your father has built a compelling case. The carbon monoxide incident looks bad, even if it was an accident. The sudden career change looks impulsive. Without a longer track record of stability, then we need more than a track record. Victoria pulled out her phone. I have an idea. She called Jennifer Park. It rang 4 times before Jennifer answered. Victoria, is everything okay? I need to ask you a huge favor, and you can absolutely say no, but I'm in court right now. My father's trying to have me declared incompetent, and I need someone who isn't invested in the business to testify that I'm not crazy. There was a long pause. Then Jennifer said, Where and when? Helena Courthouse. Right now, if you can make it. If not, I understand. I'm in Missoula visiting a client. I can be there in 2 hours. Jennifer, you don't have to. Yes, I do. What you built at that cabin, that's not the work of someone incompetent. That's the work of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I'll be there. When the hearing resumed, Margaret informed the judge that they had an additional witness. Robert's attorneys objected, but Judge Reeves allowed it, noting that conservatorship cases required thorough examination of the evidence. Jennifer arrived 90 minutes later, still in her business suit, and took the stand. Miss Park, Margaret began, how do you know Victoria Ashford? I was her first guest at Ashford Mountain Retreat. I stayed for 5 nights. And what was your impression of the property and Ms. Ashford's management of it? It was exceptional. Everything from the booking process to the checkout was professional and thoughtful. The cabin itself was beautifully designed and maintained. It was clear that someone with significant attention to detail and business sense was running the operation. Did you have any interactions with Ms. Ashford that suggested mental instability? None. She was responsive, professional, and genuinely cared about the guest experience. I've stayed at dozens of luxury properties. This was in the top 5, and it's run by someone who supposedly can't manage her own affairs? Jennifer looked at the judge. I run a tech company. I evaluate people's competence for a living. Victoria Ashford is not only competent, she's building something that's going to be incredibly successful if she's allowed to continue. Robert's attorney tried to dismiss Jennifer as a biased witness. She'd gotten a discount rate, after all. But Jennifer calmly explained that she'd paid full price for the extension, that she'd booked again for next month at the regular rate, and that she'd recommended the property to 6 colleagues who were also booking stays. That's not bias, she said. That's recognition of quality. After Jennifer stepped down, the judge called another recess. Victoria tried to read Judge Reeves' expression, but couldn't. What do you think? She asked Margaret. I think we've made a good case, but your father's attorneys are convincing too. It could go either way. The afternoon was taken up with the psychiatrist Robert had hired. They testified about risk factors and behavior patterns, using clinical language to make Victoria's choices sound pathological. Leaving her career was flight from responsibility. Moving to the cabin was social isolation. The partnership with Ethan was dependent attachment to a caretaker figure. It was infuriating, listening to her life twisted into symptoms. But Margaret had coached her not to react, so Victoria sat still and silent while strangers diagnosed her from across a courtroom. Finally, Judge Reeves spoke. I've heard extensive testimony from both sides. This is not a decision I take lightly. Ms. Ashford, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why should I believe you're competent to manage your own affairs? Victoria stood on shaking legs. Margaret had prepared her for this, but now that the moment was here, all the rehearsed answers fled her mind. Your Honor, 6 weeks ago, I had everything most people think they want. Money, prestige, security. But I didn't have freedom. My father controlled every aspect of my life, where I worked, who I saw, what decisions I could make. And I realized that's not living. That's existing in a cage he built. She took a breath. So, yes, I left. I moved to a cabin that needed work. I learned skills I'd never needed before. I made mistakes, including one that almost killed me. But those were my mistakes to make, and I learned from them. I asked for help. I built a partnership with someone I trust. I created a business that's already generating revenue and positive reviews. Victoria looked at her father for the first time since the hearing started. My father thinks I'm incompetent because I won't do what he wants. But choosing my own path doesn't make me crazy. It makes me human. And if being human means being imperfect and making mistakes and building something from nothing, then yes, I'm guilty of all of that. But I'm not incompetent. I'm just finally living my own life. The courtroom was silent. Judge Reeves made a note on her legal pad. Thank you, Ms. Ashford. I'll take this under advisement and issue a ruling by the end of the week. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. End of the week. 3 more days of not knowing if she'd won her freedom or lost everything. Outside the courthouse, Ethan pulled her into a hug. You were amazing in there. I don't know if it was enough. It was enough. You told the truth. That's all you can do. Jennifer found them in the parking lot. I have to head back to Missoula, but Victoria, that speech in there? That was the truth. Don't let anyone make you doubt it. After she left, Victoria turned to Ethan. What if we lose? What if the judge sides with my father? Then we appeal. We fight. We don't give up. He cupped her face in his hands. But Victoria? I don't think we're going to lose. That judge heard you, really heard you. And I think she saw what I see, someone brave enough to choose the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing. The next 3 days crawled by. Victoria tried to work, tried to focus on the next booking, tried to do anything except wait. Ethan kept her busy with small tasks around the cabin, touch-up paint, landscaping, building a small shed for storage. Physical work that kept her hands occupied even if her mind kept spinning. Lily appointed herself Victoria's official distraction coordinator. She insisted on movie nights and baking sessions and elaborate art projects. On Wednesday, she presented Victoria with a drawing of the cabin surrounded by hearts. This is your happy place, Lily announced, because you built it and nobody can take it away. Victoria hung it on the cabin wall, right next to the stone fireplace. Thursday evening, Margaret called. The ruling's coming tomorrow at 10. Be at the courthouse. Victoria barely slept. She was up at 5, too restless to stay in bed. Ethan found her on his porch, watching the sun come up. Whatever happens today, he said, sitting beside her, we're going to be okay. You can't promise that. I can promise that I'm not going anywhere. That Lily thinks you're family. That we've built something real here, and it's not going away just because a judge signs a paper. He took her hand. You're not alone in this, Victoria. Not anymore. The courthouse was less crowded this time. Just Victoria, Margaret, Robert with his legal team, and Judge Reeves. No witnesses, no testimony, just the ruling. Judge Reeves entered and everyone stood. She sat, reviewed her notes, and began. I've considered all the evidence presented in this case. Conservatorships are serious interventions, reserved for individuals who truly cannot care for themselves. The burden of proof lies with the petitioner to demonstrate that such an intervention is necessary. Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. The evidence shows that Ms. Ashford has, in recent weeks, made several significant life changes. She left her position at her father's company. She moved to an isolated property. She entered into a business partnership and launched an enterprise with limited capital. To some, these choices might appear impulsive or unwise. Victoria felt the room tilt. This was it. She'd lost. However, Judge Reeves continued, the evidence also shows that Ms. Ashford's choices, while unconventional, have been thoughtful and ultimately successful. She secured independent financing. She developed a business plan that has already generated revenue. She sought professional help when needed and learned from her mistakes. Most importantly, multiple credible witnesses testified that Ms. Ashford demonstrates sound judgment, professional competence, and emotional stability. The judge looked directly at Victoria. Choosing a different path from what your family wants is not evidence of incompetence. It's evidence of independence. And the law does not permit conservatorship simply because a parent disagrees with an adult child's life choices. Victoria couldn't breathe. Therefore, I am denying the petition for conservatorship. Ms. Ashford will retain full control of her affairs, her assets, and her business. This ruling is final. The gavel came down, and Victoria felt the world rush back into focus. She'd won. She was free. Robert stood abruptly and left without a word, his attorneys scrambling to follow. Margaret was talking, explaining next steps and legal protections, but Victoria barely heard her. She walked out of the courthouse into the bright Montana morning and just stood there, letting it sink in. Ethan was waiting on the steps. "I won," she said, still not quite believing it. "I know, I was watching through the window," he grinned. "Told you that judge saw through your father's bull." Victoria laughed, and it came out half-sob. "I can't believe it's over." "It's not over. It's just beginning." Ethan pulled her close. "Now we get to build everything we planned. No more fighting your father, no more court dates. Just us and the business and whatever comes next." What came next was harder and better than Victoria could have imagined. They threw themselves into the work with renewed energy. The cabin stayed booked solid through spring and into summer. They hired a local teenager to handle cleaning between guests. They partnered with tour guides and restaurants in town to offer package deals. By July, they had enough revenue to start serious planning for the second cabin. The permit issues had quietly resolved themselves. Victoria suspected her father had pulled his influence, either out of defeat or indifference. Either way, she didn't care. The second cabin broke ground in August. This one was bigger, designed for families with 2 bedrooms and a larger deck. Ethan hired 2 assistants to help with construction. Victoria managed the bookings and marketing, discovering she had a talent for hospitality that surprised her. Lily started 3rd grade that fall, and when the teacher asked students what their parents did for work, she proudly announced that her dad built luxury cabins and she'd paused, looking at Victoria, who'd come for the classroom visit, and V helps. Victoria had to excuse herself to the hallway to cry. In October, they got their first inquiry about hosting a wedding. A couple from Denver wanted to rent both cabins for their families and have the ceremony on the mountain overlook. Victoria said yes before even checking with Ethan. "We're doing weddings now?" he asked when she told him. "Why not? We've got the space, the views, the accommodations. It's another revenue stream." "You know what this means, right? We'll need to build an event space, proper bathrooms for guests, probably a 3rd cabin for overflow." Victoria smiled. "Sounds like we need to expand." They spent that winter planning. The business was solid now, with enough revenue to justify a construction loan. They drew up plans for the event space, for the 3rd cabin, for everything they dreamed about during those early days when the first cabin was still half finished and the future was uncertain. On New Year's Eve, they hosted a small party at the first cabin, the one that had started everything. Maggie from the diner came, along with Mrs. Chen, the photographer who'd taken their website shots, and Jennifer Park, who'd driven from Seattle specifically for this. At midnight, when everyone else was counting down outside, Victoria found Ethan in the kitchen. "Can you believe we did this?" she asked. "Some days, no. Other days, it feels like the only thing that makes sense." He turned from the window where he'd been watching the fireworks someone had set off in town. "You know what I was thinking about?" "What?" "That first day you showed up here in those ridiculous boots, looking like you'd taken a wrong turn out of a fashion magazine. I thought you'd last 3 days, Max." "I know. I could tell." Victoria moved closer. "What changed your mind?" "You hauled that stove through the mud without complaining, and then you asked me to teach you instead of pretending you already knew everything." He smiled. "That's when I knew you were for real." "I was so lost back then. I had no idea what I was doing." "You knew enough. You knew you wanted something different, something real." Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket. "Speaking of real," Victoria's heart stopped. "Ethan, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 7 months, but I also know that I want to build the rest of my life with you. Not just the business, but everything. You, me, Lily, and whatever else comes." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver band with a small diamond. "So Victoria Ashford, will you marry me?" Victoria looked at the ring, at this man who'd believed in her when she barely believed in herself, at the cabin they'd built together from nothing but stubbornness and hope. She thought about her father, who tried to control her with money and power and failed. She thought about her old life, the one she'd left behind without regret. And she thought about Lily, asleep at home with Mrs. Chen babysitting, who'd asked last week if Victoria was going to be her mom for real. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Ethan slid the ring on her finger and kissed her, and outside someone cheered, probably Maggie, who'd been watching through the window. They were married in April, on the mountain overlook where that Denver couple had exchanged vows 6 months earlier. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Jennifer came from Seattle, along with a dozen other former guests who'd become friends. Even Margaret made the trip, bringing a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for the occasion. Robert Ashford wasn't invited. Victoria had sent him one letter after the court case, making it clear that she was done fighting and done seeking his approval. He could be part of her life on her terms or not at all. He'd never responded, and she hadn't expected him to. Some bridges, once burned, stayed that way. And Victoria was learning that was okay. The business grew. By their second anniversary, they had 4 cabins, a proper event space, and enough bookings that they had to turn people away during peak season. They hired a small staff, local people who needed the work and took pride in what they were building. Ethan's contracting business expanded too. He was getting calls from all over the state, people who'd seen his work at the retreat and wanted him to build their dream homes or renovate their properties. He turned down most of them, focusing on projects he actually cared about. "I'm done building things just for money," he told Victoria. "I want to build things that matter." Lily thrived. She spent her afternoons after school at the retreat, doing homework in the office they'd built above the event space, helping with small tasks, charming guests with her enthusiasm. She called Victoria V to everyone except her friends, who got the full story. "That's my stepmom. She used to be a billionaire, but now she builds cabins with my dad, and she's way happier." On their 3rd anniversary, Victoria sat on the deck of the original cabin, the one they never rented out anymore, keeping it as their private space, and took stock of everything they'd built. 4 cabins, an event space that hosted a dozen weddings a year, a staff of 8, partnerships with local businesses, a reputation that brought guests from all over the country, and a waiting list for bookings that stretched into next year. But more than that, a home, a family, a life that was messy and imperfect and entirely hers. Ethan found her there, carrying 2 beers and wearing the flannel shirt he'd been wearing the day they met. He'd kept it, despite Victoria's attempts to throw it away, claiming it was his lucky shirt. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, handing her a beer. "How far we've come. How different everything is." "Better different?" "So much better." Victoria leaned against him. "Sometimes I think about that version of me who showed up here in designer boots and a duffel bag. I barely recognize her." "I do. She's the same person, just freer now." Lily came running up the path, out of breath and excited. She was 10 now, all long legs and boundless energy. "Mom! Dad! There's a family at Cabin 3 who wants to know if we do horseback riding packages." "We don't have horses," Victoria pointed out. "But we could. I've been researching it. There's a stable in town that does trail rides. We could partner with them, include it in a package deal." "Lily," Ethan interrupted gently, "that's a business conversation for later. Right now is family time." "But later." Lily sighed dramatically, but sat down on the deck between them. "Fine, but I'm making a presentation with charts." Victoria smiled. Lily had inherited her business sense and Ethan's stubbornness. The combination was going to be formidable. They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fights, the fear, the moments when she'd been certain she was making a terrible mistake. She thought about the stove incident, about nearly dying because she was too proud to ask for help, about learning, slowly and painfully, that strength didn't mean doing everything alone, that building something real required trust and vulnerability and the courage to let people in. She thought about her father and how he'd tried to teach her that power came from control. He'd been wrong. Real power came from choice, from building instead of taking, from creating something that existed because people wanted it, not because they'd been forced to accept it. "What are you thinking about now?" Ethan asked quietly. "That I'm happy. And I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Victoria turned to kiss him. "Thank you for taking a chance on the crazy billionaire in the expensive boots. Thank you for hauling that stove through the mud without quitting." Lily made a face. "You guys are so weird about that stove." "It's a metaphor," Victoria said. "For what?" "For doing hard things even when you don't know if they'll work out." Lily thought about this. Like building cabins when everyone said it was impossible? Exactly like that. "Cool."
Lily leaned her head on Victoria's shoulder. Can we make s'mores? So they did. They built a fire in the outdoor pit and roasted marshmallows and told stories about the early days, when the cabin was still half finished and they were running on hope and stubbornness. They laughed about the mistakes and the near disasters and the moments when everything had hung in the balance. And as the fire burned low and the stars came out overhead, Victoria realized something. She'd spent so much of her life looking for freedom that she'd never stopped to consider what came after. The answer, it turned out, was this: building something lasting with people you loved, creating a legacy that wasn't about money or power, but about the lives you touched and the community you built. Her grandfather would have approved, she thought. He'd left her the land knowing she'd need a foundation to stand on when she was ready to build her own life. He'd probably known, long before she did, that she'd eventually find the courage to leave her father's empire and create something better. I wish he could see this, she said softly. See what? Ethan asked. All of it. What we built here. What his trust made possible. I think he does see it. In you. Ethan squeezed her hand. You're living the life he wanted for you. That's the best tribute you could give him. Lily had fallen asleep against Victoria's side, sticky with marshmallow and content. Ethan carefully lifted her and carried her toward the truck. Victoria followed, taking one last look at the cabin, their cabin, the one that had started everything. The lights were warm in the windows. The deck they'd built together was solid underfoot. The mountains stood eternal in the background, indifferent to human struggles but somehow comforting in their permanence. Victoria had come here broken and desperate, armed with nothing but a duffel bag and a trust fund her father couldn't touch. She'd made mistakes and learned hard lessons. She'd nearly died and had to relearn how to trust people. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd built something beautiful. As they drove down the mountain road toward home, Victoria thought about what she'd tell that version of herself who'd shown up 7 months ago in designer boots and desperation. She'd tell her that it gets better, that the hard work pays off, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Most of all, she'd tell her that freedom isn't something you inherit or buy. It's something you build, one choice at a time, with people who believe in you even when you don't quite believe in yourself. The truck rumbled over the gravel road, carrying them home through the Montana night. And Victoria Ashford, former billionaire heiress turned mountain retreat owner, smiled at her sleeping daughter and her husband and thought about tomorrow. There were cabins to maintain and guests to welcome and a business to run. There was Lily's presentation about horses to review and vendors to negotiate with, and 1,000 small decisions that would shape their future. It was ordinary and exhausting and more fulfilling than anything she'd ever done in her father's boardrooms. It was, in every way that mattered, exactly the life she'd been fighting for. And it was only just beginning.